Oh, and it's
Oh, and
Rachel.
Rachel. Okay.
Sorry, I thought you both were public.
Well,
Because,
let's go.
Okay.
okay, go ahead.
We've got a little change in plan here. We're gonna lose one of the BRSU board members shortly, so we're gonna try to get that out of the way in advance. So I'm gonna call the meeting of BRSU board to order at 9:53 a.m. The first order of business is superintendent report, ratification of teacher master agreement. I think David's going to give us a very quick overview. Does that make sense, Randy?
Yes, but do we want to call T&G also to order?
Again, because I think some T&G members may not think that our meeting begins
Okay.
until
All
10.
right, that's
So
fine.
we'll try to finish the BRSU and then we'll enter into T&G.
That sounds
Okay,
good.
so this is the Reader's Digest condensed version. My video is not working, so you're going to hear a disembodied voice. So basically, and I think we said this before, our focus was to send a positive message of deep appreciation to our teachers. And this became even more important given the added stress of the COVID crisis. So we feel very positively about the outcome. And of course, it was a lot of work under some very challenging conditions. So initially we made a proposal that was put on the table in February. And that included a pretty good boost in the pay. And then 2.7, which actually got increased to 3%. And that we decided that we needed to honor that as part of the negotiation process. So even though the crisis did shift a lot of focus, we honored that offer that was on the table. And then the financial offer also includes, because our focus was to add extra days to the teacher's contract, so there is time for personal leave. For professional development. I'm going too fast. We wanted to add 2 additional days for professional development, and we were also trying to expand a little bit of the time that was available, either the work day or at least 2 times a month, so that teachers could, so that principals could have staff meetings and other kinds of meetings. So we built in 2 extra days plus 2 90-minute sessions, and we added some money for that too. So these were much needed additions. And then we developed a salary schedule, actually the teachers did, that was based on what they thought was an approach to fairness and balance throughout the SU. So we now feel like we have a well-unified supervisory union with everybody on the same page, nobody feeling left out or undercompensated or treated differently. And in the end, we feel very positive about that. Most of these, there were some tweaks to the contract that included working conditions, work hours, reimbursement for expenses, early retirement, sick leave. There were a lot of tweaks, and that took a lot of time as well. Our working premise was that our teachers are a resource we value and treat with dignity. We sent that message at every stage of the negotiation. The contract is mostly a policy level document. Procedures will be developed and administered as appropriate at the SU and at the school board, at the school level by principals. So there were some lessons learned as a result of our efforts. And in the interest of helping negotiations get off on the best foot possible in 3 years, we're going to conduct a debrief among ourselves, and we'll keep a record of the key lessons learned. So that's a quick summary. I hope that's enough information. If anyone has any questions or anything else to add, Dick or Randy, I appreciate, now's the time.
Deb?
I just had a question that I asked David that the rest of you might also be curious about. I wondered how much of the health insurance was negotiated at our level and how much was a result of the state contract.
Zero.
David,
At our, we were forced by the state to accept exactly what the proposed health issue was. And in fact, it actually benefits our bottom line because of the co-pays issues. We resolved a number of questions that the state had not yet resolved until about April, maybe a little later than April. And almost all of those things were resolved in our favor.
But and technically, David said it doesn't go into effect until next January. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
January
Yes.
1st.
But we've adopted it early.
No,
No, it goes into effect on January 1st. So our current plan stays until December 31st.
Right.
And there are attempts to revisit some of that language. The VSBA has been involved in trying to get some things going, but not terribly successfully so far. Okay. Any other question? Yep, Melanie.
Yeah, I'm looking at Article 15.5.1, and I'm wondering if this is written wrong. It says it's dealing with teachers going on sabbatical, and it says if approved, the board will pay the teacher 1/2 of current salary for a year's leave or full salary for a half year's leave, which seems to be backwards to me.
No, I think they get paid their full salary for the 6 months as opposed to getting paid half their salary if they take the year. It
Yeah.
encourages a shorter leave, I think. It's like, hey, if you only take 6 months, we'll pay you everything. But if you're going to take the full year, we're only going to pay you half.
And
Oh,
we
so
didn't,
that's
we didn't,
intended to be that way.
yeah, we didn't adjust this from the prior agreement. So this was not a change from the prior agreement. This is what's been in place for, I don't know, at least the last 3 years.
Huh.
Right.
Is this the appropriate time for the T&G to ask questions about this, or are we going to address that later? Because I have a whole list on this thing.
Let's give priority to the BRSU folks, but if they've asked all the questions they have, it's up to Jim. I'd say let everybody ask questions.
But T&G hasn't been called to order yet.
Correct, but there's
So
they can be
it's,
members.
I guess the question would be, if the BRSU board members feel uncomfortable ratifying the agreement at this point because there could be additional questions at T&G, let us know. Of course, if BRSU ratifies, T&G has some questions, changes, whatever, then we could always revisit. But
Well, as a matter of fact, it's now 10:01, so I can call the T&G meeting to order also.
we're gonna lose Corey though.
Yeah, I think my password was wrong. So I had texted Celeste. The one that we got in the BRSU email was a different password than the one that actually admitted me to the meeting. So that might be the problem with other BRSU attendees. If they're just going off of that one email, I don't know.
Okay.
But Michael and Diane aren't here. But anyway, sorry. Yes, we will lose me very shortly. So
Our plan to do this very quickly is sort of unraveling. Do you have a few more minutes, Corey?
Yeah, probably. About 3, I guess.
Okay.
Sorry.
Let me then propose that let's see if the BRSU can get to a point of agreeing to ratify. Then T&G can have a further discussion, and if we need to revisit, we can revisit. But does anybody on the BRSU board feel the need to go into executive session to discuss this further? If no one does, then I'll entertain a motion.
I move that the BRSU accept and sign the contract negotiated as presented to us.
Okay, motion by Dick. Is there a second?
A second.
Okay, Corey is a second. Now we're looking at, 2 things: ratification of teacher master agreement and approved memorandum of agreement. Was that included in your?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So any further discussion? Then all in favor of approving the motion, please say aye.
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 Put your hand up.
Okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so it's unanimous. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I assume David Chandler voted yes. Video's not.
Oh, David, yes, did you vote, David?
Yes, I voted yes.
He did
My
thumbs
thumb,
up.
Oh, I have
my thumb was up.
one more item to touch on before we leave. We had a BRSU board meeting scheduled for Monday. And a long gap until our next meeting in November. However, we didn't really have a lot of business on that, and Randy is kind of totally flat out. So Randy and I discussed, and if nobody has an objection, we will not hold that BRSU board meeting on Monday, but we'll be open to calling a new meeting if necessary between now and the November meeting. Does anybody have an objection to that approach? Okay, so that's our other business. Motion to adjourn by Dick, second.
I'll second it, David.
David seconded it. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Corey, get to your
Okay,
appointment.
bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Corey.
Thanks.
Okay, I called the T&G meeting to order at, I think it was 10:01. Do we have any public involved in our T&G meeting?
I don't have anybody who's called in, and the meeting is being recorded, but is for some reason not streaming to YouTube. So we'll make the recording available. Here comes Jane right now. We'll make the recording available on our website. Okay.
Okay. And let's see, do we have a quorum? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yes, we do have a quorum. Okay. So since there isn't any public comment, let's move to item 3A on the agenda, which is ratification of the teacher master agreement, which most of you have heard at least some discussion of because you tuned in while the BRSU was having its meeting. Is there anybody that would like, David or anybody else, to give more of a recap of the new agreement? If you would, okay, Rachel, yeah.
Just have a couple of specific points I'd just like them to address, if that's okay.
Sure. Go ahead, tell them what it is.
So really, I'm just curious about what, if any, discussions took place around, I'll reference packet page 13 and 14, kind of the 7.1 to 7.13 stuff that talks about what teachers can do when they feel their health, safety, or well-being is in jeopardy. And, it says they shall not, 13 says they shall not be required to work under conditions which constitute a threat to their health and safety. So I'm just wondering what, if any, discussions took place around that, because to me, that seems like an area that is ripe for, people who are concerned about teaching in the current climate to cite to.
David, you
Yes.
want me to try? This whole section from 7.1 all the way concerning safety occupied at least 3 4-hour meetings in order to address both the teacher concern and our concern that the students also be protected. They had an extensive proposal that we adjudged mostly to be procedural. And at the same time that this discussion was taking place, it was in April and in May, where an awful lot of school safety concerns were being discussed, and Randy and Jackie both created a task force to address the issue of safety. The language that we came up with in terms of policy was, in our estimation, a fair statement that puts the students first, but it also protects the teachers as well. And so we spent an awful lot of time noodling through the precise language that we got to, and there were many times that a word here or a word there stopped the meeting down, so that what you see in terms of that is our best compromise from both of our perspectives, emphasizing the perspective of safety.
Dick, is it fair to say that a lot of the key language is in 7.12 and 7.13?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Dick, for that. And then the other portion is kind of around that too, on packet page 28, looking at kind of the leave policies and things like that. So I'd just be curious to hear about how the discussions, were around what leave people are entitled to, and that portion as it related to both our contract and like what the federal government is offering during that time.
Okay, so again, David, if it's okay with you, can I
You're on a
start?
roll.
Okay. The leave policy language, and there were about 100 places in this contract where we tried to standardize the language across the district. 1. 2, where we tried very hard to listen very carefully to concerns, and 3, where we tried to implement the actual policy the way things actually work in the system. And so in terms of leave and the way leaves are granted, Sue and Jackie, and to a degree, Randy, all spent an awful lot of time taking the policies that used to exist that were not clearly defined enough and related back to the way we actually relate and deal with leave. The teachers were in particular concerned with, if somebody applied for leave, that there was a degree of inequity depending upon the attitude and timing of the principal and when the leave was applied for. And what they wanted to do was to standardize as much as possible a procedure which we didn't buy into, that would make it as fair or equitable as possible. The language that we came up with, again, was a compromise. And we made sure that we wouldn't compromise, that gave control over leave to the teachers, but rather preserved control to the superintendent with respect to granting that leave. And we wouldn't budge on that particular issue. The rest of the language that involves leave was a bit of payback to them in terms of making sure that the teachers perceived that the whole process was equitable.
Awesome. I appreciate you clarifying both of those. Randy, has anybody made requests? Do we have similar language under the current contract? And have there been requests? And if so, how many are there? It looks like the board has to approve some of these, which I wasn't aware of until I read through this. So just wondering.
So I guess I'm specifically on where you were on packet page 28.
Yep.
So that leave, are you referring to the expansion of the Family Leave Act under the COVID expansion of leave? Is that what you're referring to? I'm not entirely sure. Board members don't approve leaves. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page, Rachel, about what you're actually asking about when I look at what's on packet page 28.
Well, so it looks like boards approve sabbaticals.
Yes, boards approve sabbaticals.
And the contract is written, to allow for kind of a merge of whatever the federal policy may be at the time. So it kind of merges in what's in existence, which has been currently modified. But like it looks like certain leaves of absences and so long-term sabbaticals are board approved requirements and, typical leaves go under the district. But has anybody made, I've heard at like the SVSU, there are multiple teachers at Mount Anthony who have requested long-term sabbaticals, for this year. And so I'm just wondering, are there?
Yeah, so we've had, thank you for clarifying that. We've had no sabbatical requests. We are in the process actively this week of really diving into all of our leave requests according to FFCR and the different leave provisions that are available. We're also looking at ADA accommodations that people are making. We do have right now a couple people requesting a potential leave of absence. We're in the process of all of that. And my hope is that by the end of this week, we have our head wrapped around every single one of them. But those don't come to you. That's different than a sabbatical. And I've had 0 requests for a sabbatical. And typically those are done prior to the end of the previous year. So I would look at it carefully if somebody was requesting one now. But yeah, that application comes in no later than January 1st of the preceding year. So that's why we haven't had any requests. Okay.
And Jane has a question.
So I think Lindsay too.
Go ahead, Jane, and then Lindsay.
Yes, thank you. So first of all, again, just to apologize for a few minutes late, had problems with connectivity. On that note, I think I may have missed a few things that was said. So please feel free to interrupt me and direct me as needed with respect to this question, but it does piggyback a little bit, I think, on what Rachel was pointing out. I had a concern as well on the, I guess it was the 713, again, what teachers might consider a threat of health safety. And I heard some of what was said, but the question that I had there was with respect to knowing that there's potential problems with having enough teachers in place. And I began to wonder with respect to knowing that what we learned in the annual workshop, that Vermont is above average on teachers that are in the age risk group related to COVID. And then I started thinking, yes, they're essential workers, and there's going to be some inherent risks, and there's been wonderful planning done to protect for the safety. But I wondered if there's been any consideration with those unusual factors to consider requests for more teaching being remote for that particular age group as it relates to increased risk. Because I think it also begins to question, potentially in my mind, a question of potential discrimination as it relates to health and age. But I know it's new territory.
The language in 713 is specifically designed not necessarily to deal with the COVID crisis. It was designed to deal with probably a gunman coming in or some other threat to the group. The effort on the part of 713 in particular is to give the superintendent the final say. And then, because we agreed that it was important to revise and extend procedures to give the teachers an opportunity to express concerns, but the control over all of this process is in the hands of the superintendent. And we were pretty insistent on that. Your concern about the COVID and the potential risks would certainly be something that you heard Randy talk about as a matter of concern when we were at our last meeting. So the COVID is not introducing materially a different framework in order to express safety issues at all. It actually sets up in 713, I think, a very reasonable set of procedures that give control to the superintendent, but massive amounts of input expected by the teachers. So I don't think that your particular concern with respect to the latest COVID crisis, while it's terribly important and certainly it changes things, is particularly relevant to the contract language that we're proposing.
I could appreciate that. And so, again, I appreciate the redirection if where needed. But I just thought I'd bring it up as a potential concern as it relates to making sure we have teachers to fill spots. But I understand that that's Randy's responsibility. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and I don't know that it's relevant to the ratification process as much
Yep.
as the procedure of what's currently happening within our organization right now.
Thank you.
Back to the ratification question, Lindsay, I think, had a comment or a question, and then Mark after that.
My question is I've never been a part of doing ratifications with the teachers' agreements and stuff like that. Is this something that where I think it goes into 2023, if we start seeing that there's, you know, maybe an issue because of the coronavirus where things might need to be changed in the contract, can there be a new amendment or ratification made before the end of the term? Or do we, does the teachers, the superintendents, does everybody have to follow exactly from now until 2023? And then in 2023, then you make the changes, if that makes
No.
sense.
Yeah, I think unless there's something in the agreement that makes an exception for unforeseen circumstances, the answer is that could be changed only if both sides agreed. Am I on the right track there, Dick and David?
Yes.
That's
Yes,
correct.
but-
So we write like memorandums of agreement, like the one you're signing today. I'm going to have another one for you also to sign in which I've made an agreement with the association to make a change and both sides agree, and I'll propose to you. For instance, you're going to get one that comes that we're working on right now regarding moving 2 days that are typically in our calendar to the front of the year for additional PD day. So as long as both sides agree to it, the changes can be made.
So if we start seeing, and I don't know what the chances are of this, but say more teachers wanting the year sabbatical, and you get to a point where you have too many requests, or someone just had a year sabbatical and wants a second year sabbatical because of their concerns, and you start seeing that there might be a potential issue for but you both have to agree to make that change. It's not something you can say, I think we need to revisit.
That's right. I mean, the whole idea of a contract is it's agreed by two sides.
No, I know, I understand that. I'm just, you know, if the superintendent starts seeing because of what's changing in the world today, that there's an issue that something needs to be revisited, if the teachers union says, well, we don't want to revisit that, you know, is that drop it right there, and then, you know, you have to wait until 2023 to bring it up?
Well, as I said, unless there's something in the contract that gives an out for circumstances like that, I think it would take both sides. So if just one side wants it, that's too bad for that side.
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, Lindsay, but I do want to say that that these contracts are structured to be, as Dick has pointed out on a couple of these specifics, to be as policy level as possible, so that as much control is in the hand, so that we're not micromanaging, and as much of the major control is in the hands of the superintendent and or the principals according to what the need is, whether it's SU issues or building issues. And we're trying to promote communication between the two groups. So we're hoping that the structure forestalls those kinds of problems, because we make it clear that the goal is, number one, the education of the students, and then the safety of the teachers, and working with that. And so our hope is that we keep a dialogue going in all these situations. And then if there are problems, then they'll file agreements. And we've had that happen as well.
Okay, and that seems to be more of what I was just looking for, that there was something, you know, if issues do arise, that you both kind of can come to the table type deal. I just didn't know if that was a possibility or if what's in here sticks until the end of the contract.
It comes down to a grievance, really, most of the time.
Yeah.
But
For
also,
example, if the teachers were to say that the superintendent had issued a procedure that conflicted with the master agreement, then I guess that would lead to a grievance.
Right.
Okay.
but also one of the key things in the way we negotiated this is we started with the presumption that we respected the perspectives and points of view of each other, and constantly came back to what's important, students, and that whatever there was in terms of procedure or things that needed to be talked about, we had an obligation and spent the entire negotiations listening to each other, trying to understand the perspective. So if there's a real issue out there of the variety that I think, Lindsay, you're referencing, we've created a framework and a dialogue. We are not in the business of you win and I lose. We have constantly pursued, we have an objective to benefit kids, and we all win when we proceed along that objective. So I don't believe that if the degree of issue that you're talking about occurred, that A, we would be unaware that it's happening, and B, that we wouldn't be willing to talk the issue through. We have great possibilities for dialogue because of the way we negotiated.
Which I get that. My thing is I just wasn't sure if the teachers came to you guys and said, this is an issue, if things could be changed. But now that I know that there's a grievance policy,
Right.
it makes sense. I wasn't doing a win or lose situation. I just know that with everything that changes, there could be issues. And if they have a feeling that something needs to be changed, I wanted to understand that there was a process that could make it so something could be changed, and that this wasn't a contract for till 2023, and then the change had to be made.
Thank you both. Before I go to Mark's question, I just want to let John Wilson, who just joined, know that we're still discussing the master agreement, which is the first about 40 pages of the packet, roughly. Mark, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, I was just curious as to what the total money is and how does that impact the back half of the budget year and what the future budget year would look like impact-wise.
We, in terms of looking at the schedule for the first year, recognized that because of the health issue, that there was a certain degree of surplus that we had in place. Part of the reason why the back end of the contract is set up was the full recognition, especially as we got into June, and July, that the state's capacity to fund education was seriously diminished. And we held the line, trying to minimize the long-term effects of what we were offering. So most of it is, and by their agreement, front-loaded. And that is tapping into the potential surplus that we have this year. We regularly ask the question with respect to everything we were offering, can we pay for it? And I think our conclusion, and it's not really mine to really noodle through all of this, but Sue Wilburn, as you know, is a pretty conservative chief financial officer, and she was very satisfied that we had negotiated not only a fair solution, but one that we could pay for.
Anybody?
So I do realize that we had limited control over the health insurance, and 3% is a fair COLA, but just how does that impact us when we're going to have to go to the taxpayers next year and ask for a budget to be funded.
So I'm happy to jump in on this just because this is obviously like very near on my horizon as we start to think about what are we going to be including in the budget that we present to you. Certainly the new money in this agreement is going to be factored into the overall big picture of the budget, and we continue to hear that planning for FY22 is going to be probably one of the most challenging experiences we've had. So is it a factor? Yes. Is it going to be, from my perspective, the sort of anything that tips a scale one way or the other? No. We are hoping in the next, expecting in the next 4 to 6 weeks that we're going to have more detailed information about what we're looking at, and we'll begin to put together a budget that we feel is reasonable to bring to you. I don't think it's going to be an easy process with or without this.
Just, I'll throw in a few other things that I've been, kind of thinking about over time. The common level appraisal is going to go sky high as real estate has been trading at or well above ask price. And then the influx of new students to both, the early, the primary education and then secondary education for sure. So this is going to be scary. I mean, there's going to be some numbers put forth to our voters that this could be the first year we might see a problem for an accepted budget.
And let me remind everybody, we are discussing the master agreement, but it does relate. Mark's comment does relate because, of course, there's money in the master agreement. Melanie, did you want to say something? You'll have to unmute yourself.
It might be more about the budget than the master agreement, but I wonder if, when putting together this master agreement, as to Mark's point of people being, wary of approving a budget, can we make sure that when we present it, we can include COVID-related expenses? So it's clear to the public what has changed. And I think, the increase in the salaries is COVID-related. It's important for people, I think, to see that the breakout so that people understand, and hopefully we get some sympathy for that.
I do want to focus on the agreement rather than on budget preparation, though. David Chandler, have you tried maybe re-signing in to Zoom to see if your video will work? Because if you have a comment, I can't see your hand. And if you can't get video, maybe you can try the hand raise feature if you want to say something.
Yeah, I would do that. I'm fine. But do you want me to make a comment?
If you have one, sure.
No, I'm not, no, I have no comments.
Okay.
I'll jump in if I have something to say.
Right. When you do want to be recognized, the only way I'll know is if you use I'm not even sure you can use a hand raise if you're not on video.
He has already.
Okay.
Yes, you can.
All right. So we'll do that with David then. All right. Other discussion of the master agreement. Don't see anybody. Deb, yeah, unmute yourself. There you go.
I just wanted to thank all of you for all the time you've spent on that. Thanks.
Yeah, I wonder how many hours that was.
David and Dick spent a tremendous amount of time on this. Hard work, commitment, dedication. You were well represented.
Thank
Are
you.
we ready to vote then? Actually, I think first, did anybody make a motion that we
No.
adopt the agreement? I don't think anybody has.
I'll move that we adopt not only the agreement, but also the memorandum of understanding.
Okay. And in that case, I think I should allow some more discussion, but let's have a second to the motion first. Seconded by Melanie. Okay. And because Dick's motion does include the memorandum of understanding, it's a one-pager, it's back at page 52. Is there any additional discussion? Don't see anybody with a hand up. All right. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. As usual, as the chair, I'm not voting. Anybody opposed? Raise your hand. All right, that passes unanimously then. Thank you. So the next item would be to adopt the ends policy, which is packet page 59. And let me kick off even before somebody makes a motion. Is the first paragraph consistent with what we voted? I think it was in June. I thought we were changing the first paragraph.
This is what we have on our end. What were you thinking that had been changed to?
Yeah, if you look at see if I can keep my cat out of the screen here. The report I just sent, the first paragraph is copied exactly from the minutes of, get down.
I remember the change. Yep.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I remember the change. In the first sentence, we said, all students of the Taconic and Greed will develop the knowledge, which infers a process that's ongoing and at every level, not just the final product.
I think there are a few more changes in that actually too.
I think you're right. So I wonder.
There's an updated version in the chair's report that you shared, Herb.
That's right. Yeah. What I attempted to do was combine the previous language with what we changed and put it in the chair's report. And it's not the same as what's here.
All right. Looks like Celeste pulled the last one, the incorrect one, and I apologize for that.
So I'm not sure we're actually ready for a motion because we don't have in front of us the policy that we meant to adopt, unless you want to use what's in my report for reference.
Use your report because it actually states the changes.
Hey, Jane has a hand up. Jane?
I have a question. I just was curious, when I read through the ends policy on just the very first thing, the 1-1, how to measure, I just was wondering, how does one measure the dispositions for lifelong learners?
Well, let's wait until we even have a motion to adopt something before we get into the nitty gritty here.
Okay.
Could you read the revised one?
Sure.
Where is it?
I have it in front of me if you want me to read it.
Page
Please,
7,
yeah,
page 7 of Herb's report.
Go ahead. Who was volunteering to read it?
I can do it. All students of the Taconic and Green Regional School District, TNG, will develop the knowledge, skills, and dispositions needed to become successful and equity-minded global citizens at a cost that supports the essential roles that schools play in our community.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And then the rest of it is the same as what you see on packet page 59, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So do we have a motion to adopt what Melanie just, well, to approve? No, I guess this is to adopt. It's not just to approve. To adopt what Melanie just read, plus what's in print as 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3.
So moved.
Moved by Deb. Is there a second? Seconded by Ben. Okay, now discussion of not exactly packet page 59, but rather of what Melanie read. Melanie, go ahead.
So I was kind of toiling with the ends policies last night and comparing it to, as a board, our goal of making sure that our work is smart, right? So that it's measurable and working through our SMART goals. And one of those things being measurable. And, as much as I absolutely love this, I'm beginning to question the ability to measure some of these dispositions, right, for lifelong learning, especially, empathy, adaptability, learner's mindset. And, it kind of led me to do some look at, Carver's ideas of ends policies. And one of the things that I came across was that, one of the ideas is that teaching is not the same as student achievement, right? When specifically talking about educational ends. And I'm curious now if and I know this is kind of last minute, but I just want to make sure that this is fleshed out and we're on the same page, that it seems as though our M's, maybe we're supposed to be framing it around the from a curricular perspective and not necessarily what the students achieve, but making sure that our ends are ensuring that the right materials and the right information is put into the curriculum, because that's something that we can measure. And that's something Randy can come back to us and say, hey, this is how we are ensuring that these kind of ideas are being presented to our students, as opposed to Randy being in the future tasked with showing us that we have empathetic students. And also to that point, if we are trying to measure this and Randy is trying to show us that we have empathetic students, is that going to be limited to, leaving the 8th grade? Or is she going to be tasked with showing us that we have achieved empathy through the high school years? Or is that something that we can't measure until they're in college? So just the concept in general of these ideas being measurable has kind of got me a little stuck in questioning that we're going in the right direction with how these ideas are presented.
Anybody
I'd like
else
to
have
react
thoughts
to
on
that. Can I react to that?
Yeah, it must be Dave, right?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So I feel very strongly about what you just raised, Melanie, because I think part of how why Vermont education was so good in the 60s and 70s when the call went out for teachers who wanted to do project-based learning and participative stuff and that sort of thing, and why we faced such dramatic problems since No Child Left Behind came on, and all of a sudden everything had to be measured in ways that we knew how to measure. So everything became quantified. And so we had to do standardized tests and all that. And I think that has really steered us the wrong way. And I feel it's very important to figure out ways, we don't have them yet. And that's why Randy's job, part of it, is to come up with monitoring stuff. We'll start with the quantitative stuff that we know how to measure and can measure. But there's also qualitative stuff, it's qualitative progress that you see and that come out. And I think they're equally important. And if we leave those behind, I think we're really pushing our education package in the very wrong direction. And I think we've done that in the last 20 years with No Child Left Behind. So I feel like even though we don't have measures set up for doing that, that's part of the challenge that Randy has been facing and probably has some ideas that she could share. But those are my comments.
Okay, John Wilson. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Yes. Again, sorry for my mistake in being late, but I think that Mel raises a good point. But I think these things are measurable. And I teach entrepreneurship, and so I try to teach a lot of creativity and innovation in high school, and working on ways to measure empathy, for example. And empathy is essential for innovation, creative thought. And there's different types of empathy. There's emotional empathy, there's physical empathy, and there's plenty of literature out there about how students can be taught empathy, how to measure empathy, and how it can be used. So, just because it may seem at this time that it's unattainable, it's an ideal, it's something that I think it's a great thing to shoot for, because again, I teach in entrepreneurship, and I model this after what Babson does, which is the leader in entrepreneurial education. You start with empathy, and you start to understand, how people feel about things, how they experience things. It's essential for problem solving. So again, I think all these things on the ends policy are certainly attainable, and it's going to take a lot of work to get there, though.
Thank you. Before I call on Jane, I just want to call your attention to policy 3.3.3, which says, as long as the superintendent uses any reasonable interpretation of the board's ends and executive limitations policies, the superintendent is authorized to establish all further procedures, make all decisions, take all actions, so forth and so on. So I think leading from Melanie's comment, What Melanie's comment shows is the burden this places on the superintendent to interpret the ends policy.
Right.
Jane, you had your hand up next, and then back to Melanie.
Thanks. So yes, that what everybody's been saying, this goes back to my original concern too, was how one measures that. But I do agree, I think it's with Dave Wilson, is that right? That it is measurable. And I think it's important as it relates to what's been identified with building equity. You know, part of being able to achieve the goals with equity is building empathy. And there are plenty of measures out there. And this became especially an emerging area of assessment as it related to shootings in schools. This is also, I think, important as it relates to the adoption, which I think schools are beginning to with social restitution. So I think that there's a lot of civic-minded learning here, opportunities. And so I do think it's important to take the time, you know, to support Randy's ability to interpret and look at measuring tools and outcomes.
I think Melanie is next, then Ben, then Deb.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, you know, I'm not questioning the idea of these concepts being part of our EMS policy. Specifically, I guess what I was trying to get at is it that we, you know, are we going in the right direction asking for the students to have these outcomes, or should we or could we approach this from the perspective of making sure that we are ingraining these in the curriculum? And maybe it's the same thing. It just seems that ingraining it in the curriculum is more measurable or more easily measurable, but and it's still to the same outcome. And maybe I'm just getting muddled kind of in the means of the situation, but you know, like I said, when I came across the line from Carver that says teaching is not student achievement, that's what I guess the crux of my question is: should we be focusing on what is being taught versus what the outcomes are?
Ben, and then Deb.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't want to belabor this point. I do think these are measurable things, and I think that the idea of policy governance is that what you measure, what you say you intend to measure matters. That's what you're going to pay attention to. And so putting this up here and saying, you know, if we're going to meet this global goal, this global ends goal, then these are the elements we think are critical to measure in order to have students become equity-minded global citizens, and et cetera. These are the pieces that we identify that we think are critical pieces. And this, some of this came out of community work and in this past year, but also previously, and in stuff that's going on statewide. Obviously, the transferable skills are part of that as well. And I do think there are psychological ways, testing ways to measure empathy that are out there, and educationally there are also ways to do that. But I think it's a good point to say that Mel's bringing up, to say, like, what's our role as a board? Is it, we're focusing on the ends. At what point are we injecting on the curricular level and saying that where that plays in? So I'll defer. I see Randy's got her hand up, and I'll defer to her, because really that's the superintendent.
And Deb is waiting to speak, and then I'll go to Randy.
Okay, I just want to say, aside from the measurability, these goals are aspirational, and that as a school board, our job is to lead. And if these are the values that we hold and that we wish for all of our, to permeate everything that goes on at school, then we should put them out there. They may not be easy to measure, but they're all values that we hold strongly, and they're aspirations more than technical things to measure.
Randy, I'll be particularly interested to hear from you, since, as I pointed out, 3.3 puts a big load on you.
Right. I appreciate the conversation and the dialogue that you've had. And I do think it's probably important that you hear from me on this as well. So I understand your responsibility is to determine whether or not this is an ends policy that you would like to adopt as a board. My job is to then look at this policy and interpret what it means and bring it to life, right? I'm sort of in charge of the means. So for instance, I want you to understand what I've done is I've been operating from the ends policy draft that we've had. I've shared it with all of the principals, and I've said, you need to own your school. Here are what we're considering, what T&G is considering for their ends policies. I want you to look at your school. I want you to look at your data points. I want you to look at who you are. And I want you to then prepare your goal for your school based on understanding that these are the aspirations and the policies that T&G is going to move forward and adopt. So the goals that they're going to present to you, and this is again based on what I've asked, based on my interpretation of the process right now, which I have not put forth for you, but in preparation for work I've seen you doing and in preparation for our school year, they will be presenting to you their school-based goals that align with ends policy, consistent with their baseline data and how they're intending on measuring progress. You may find after we go through this that I missed the mark, right? That my interpretation that I put forth is not aligned with what your intention was. And then we go back and we look at that procedurally. Part of my responsibility is to explore a whole range of aspects of our educational system, including curriculum, including resource allocation, in order to say, are we poised to move towards achieving the outcomes that you've identified in your policy? So I think that we know that this is sort of not stagnant in process, that I will give you an interpretation, you will review that, we will discuss that, and we'll get on the same page of how we're interpreting this. But I agree with and very much appreciate the broad scope in which you're looking at what is our responsibility to the children in our district. And we all know that a test score is not going to be the appropriate measure of achievement for many of our children, nor is it going to be an accurate measure of achievement for many of our students. So being able to look at the characteristics, the dispositions, the transferable skills, and the academic achievement that really do matter for our kids is what we're going to be doing. So I think that this is going to continue to be a process that we go back and forth with. You'll learn about me, I'll learn about you, and I will continue to do everything I can to execute. But from my perspective, I like the SENS policy. But my opinion doesn't necessarily matter a lot, but I like the components of it. And I like the breadth and the scope of what you have identified as important components of your policy. And I'm not afraid to tackle it from a both qualitative and quantitative approach.
Who else would like to be heard on the motion to adopt the ends policy? Deb, and then John, is your hand up again?
This is really quick. I was just remembering all that work with Peter Senge years ago. The message is, it's not what the vision is, it's what the vision does. And I think, thank you, Randy, for implementing.
Anybody else? Okay, I don't see any hands. Oh yes, John, sorry.
Yeah, I'm just curious, I think that what we have here is strong, but just wondering, and I'm sure this discussion was had, I don't see any mention of the word habits or, habits of learning. I see learner's mindset, but I see that being a little bit different than habits. And I'm just curious about the discussion around that. And this is a question for Randy, I guess, or.
That was a lot of the work of the board. I'm probably not the right person to ask John on that, because the board spent a lot of time on the language and word choice when they were working on this last winter and spring.
If someone cares to remind me about the background of the word dispositions, this may answer the question. Dick, was your hand up?
He's off doing something
Melody,
else.
would you like to say something about that?
I guess I'm just wondering, because I don't John, in the learner's mindsets, when it says embrace curiosity and experience new ideas, possess desire to learn, I mean, those to me speak to some of the habits of learning. And I don't know, I mean, I understand that they're different, but I think the idea was that by defining what that meant, it was trying to define what habits, we're hoping kids develop.
Yeah, and I think those are, kind of, I see those are kind of like, I don't want to get too inside baseball here and talk too much teacher talk, but like habits of heart, habits, maybe, and like dispositions being these attitudes towards learning, which I think is great. I think that, when I look at these, one whole I see that's missing is like habits of work, other habits about measurable things such as preparing for learning, and participation, things like, not that you have to spell all those out, but just a little bit more, these habits of learning that I'm thinking about, a little bit more, concrete and measurable, about, preparing kids for day-to-day things. And I think Ben is very well suited to speak to this as well.
Rachel and then Ben.
No, I was just gonna say we kind of created it in reverse, John. Like we did this last year where it was like, what skills and habits do you want your students to have? And then we like chose these words based on that. So it was kind of looking at it like that, but that was all I said. Yeah, Ben.
Go ahead, Ben.
I think some of what John was getting at and asking about are bundled into the Vermont's transferable skills, which are detailed to quite extensively. Not here, obviously, but there's a lot of detail on what clear and effective communication entails and how that's measured and quantified, and that all through a lot of Vermont AOE work that's statewide. So there's a bunch that's in there. I think I think these are my overall sense is like these are good goals, and they're not perfect, and I think some of the language I might tweak. I don't want just dispositions and towards adaptability and empathy. I want students to not just have an inclination to do these things, but to actually do these things, right? And so that's a different word. That might be a different word that we plug in there, but I think the intent is clear, and what we're getting at is that students will develop these, not only a mindset of empathy and adaptability and of a learning mindset, but they'll be developing skills, capacity, and in the actual practice of doing that work. So I think that's all embedded in there. And I think, again,
you're right. It's in self-direction. I think it's in self-direction there. And yes, I think you're right, Ben. It's in that under transferable skills, self-direction would fall under that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other? Yes, Randy.
I just wanted to remind us that this is just a placeholder, that when we get to the retreat, we're going to be talking about the community engagement to actually develop an ends policy. So I guess just to remember that this is a placeholder policy for right now.
Good point. We had originally planned to do this after we had all the community involvement, and then along came the pandemic. Anybody else have a comment? Melanie?
I just want to say, and I believe we're supposed to review this ends policy every year. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that part of our, right?
Mark, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say quickly that in comparison to some ends policies of earlier years, this has come a long way. And like Melanie just pointed out, it's an annual process for improvement every year. So it's off to a good start.
Anybody else want to say anything before we take a vote on the motion? I don't see any hands. Dave, do you have anything? If you do, just shout out, I guess.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. All those in favor of the motion, which is to adopt the ends policy as it was printed on page 7 of my report, please say aye, or raise your hand rather. Sorry. Old habits die hard. And anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, raise your hand. Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you. And the next item is to develop a statement of support for the superintendent. And David already took a whack at that, so it's pretty short. I'm not sure everybody had a chance to read their email. Has everybody seen it? No,
I didn't send it around to everybody. I just
Oh,
sent
okay.
it around to you guys to see if it was appropriate to circulate.
Okay, so why don't, if it's okay with you, David, why don't you simply read it and then we can talk about it?
Okay, so I was trying in the effort to be expedient. I thought I would take a whack at it instead of just throwing it out there like I did before. So this is put in the form of a resolution. So it starts out with the whereases. So whereas the COVID situation may present challenges that cannot be anticipated or predicted, whereas the well-being and the educational success of our children is of the highest importance, whereas a close second to the well-being of our children is the well-being of our staff, teachers, administrators, etc. And whereas the superintendent will always, or we expect will operate within the parameters of policy governance, it is resolved that the T&G board will support any initiatives or efforts the superintendent must take to support her students, teachers, staff, and fellow administrators in managing the COVID situation. If there are concerns around any specific actions taken, we will review the process afterwards and establish lessons learned, enabling us to grow and thrive as an educational community.
Does anybody have the ability to do a split screen so that we can actually have the resolution on the screen?
You can just do a post.
All of us have
Share
that
the
ability.
screen.
You can share yours. If David has this up on his screen, oh, doesn't have a video, but it should work. You can share screen or whoever has
Let me
it.
see.
Or email it to us.
I can screen. Do you want me to just share my screen right now?
No, why
Go
not?
for
Yeah,
it. Thank you.
thank you.
Sure.
Great.
Sorry, hold on a second. Just
Well,
drag
that's there.
slowly. There you go.
There we go.
Let me make it a
So why
little.
don't we all take a moment to reread it just to ourselves?
David added a phrase after concerns in the final sentence.
You're quick there, Dick. I did. I said around any specific actions taken after concerns.
With that addition, David, do you want to make that a motion or do you just want to discuss the general concept first?
I can make an emotion if it's complete complete enough to be something submitted for review.
Well, I think it'd be helpful just to focus us on what's on the screen plus your one change.
I move that we approve the proposed statement of support for the superintendent.
Second.
Okay, moved by David, seconded by Dick. Okay, now I see if I can get back to a grid view. I cannot do a grid view at the same time I'm watching the screen for the statement. So
You can stop sharing.
yeah, I guess if
People
you
are done
stop
reading it.
sharing.
Does anybody need to read it more?
No.
Okay, and Deb has her hand up. Go ahead, Deb.
I think this is good, but I wonder how it's different than the policy we adopted last time.
Dave, you want to speak to that?
It shouldn't be, but I thought it would be a good message for the teachers to hear in advance so that they know that we're actually thinking about them and the whole community, not just the teachers, but the staff and in many ways parents. But I don't mention parents much in here. So that's what I was thinking.
And Jane. You need to unmute.
Sorry,
There you go.
yes, thank you. Having responded to large-scale disasters, I know theoretically it's always important to support someone at the top, who's ever in charge. And I know that Randy spoke to being in the middle of that hub with very good leaders. And so in theory, I'd like to be able to support that, which I did when we voted on this. But I have to say that one of the things I have concern about, and so if anybody wants to speak to this, that would be great. But my concern has been when I started wrestling with this is that, and I don't mean this to be getting political, I really mean this as just fact of the matter. Things are moving so quickly with COVID, and there's issues around funding and defunding and using FEMA monies, and yet we don't have an actual declaration of disaster declared. There's issues with medical people being left out of the process of really important planning. We don't have, the CDC and how you usually report cases and so forth. So much of the infrastructure that we once had that someone in leadership, I feel, could rely upon to somehow be communicated among their team, it was there. And I have to say, as someone who's, again, responded in large-scale disasters, a lot of that infrastructure is being destroyed. And it concerns me not as a thing of having distrust in Randy or any one person, but it's a process issue. I feel like there's a lot of fragmentation now that is developing in this kind of COVID response. And I mean, I could go on and give really good examples, but I don't want to be taking over too much time here. So I am hesitant at this point to adopt this.
Rachel has her hand up.
Okay, so if we are going to adopt it, there are a couple things that I'd like to do. One, I don't think that the first word should say may. I think it should just say will, because there's going to be uncertainty, and I think it should be more acknowledgement of that. Second, I don't actually love that we say the kids are our priority and the teachers are our second priority. If we're doing this for the teachers, like, everyone's at the same risk going in there, and I know from our standpoint, we're educating our students, but if we're trying to show solidarity and support with the teachers, I think telling them that they're our second priority probably isn't very helpful. And I think there should be some acknowledgement of the community here, because as Randy said multiple times, like, this is a community spread issue as far as COVID goes, and it's a community-wide responsibility. And even though we're only tasked with making decisions for the district, our decisions for the district affect our community. So I think they should be like an acknowledgement there. So those were my 3 comments without having it in front of me anymore to make things.
Just because I drank too much coffee this morning and I need to take a break, could I suggest we have Rachel put the resolution back up on the screen and take a break until 11:10? Would that be okay with everybody?
Could you send it by email so that we can just have it?
Or both?
Yeah, David, do you want to send if you updated it, do you want to send the updated one out?
I'll send it
Or
to
even
you.
maybe you can even copy and paste it in the chat.
Right, just it's in a Word doc. So you mean the whole text in the chat, right, Melanie?
Yeah,
We could do
I
that.
think so. It's not
I'll
very
do
long.
that.
So we'll resume the discussion at 10 past.
Or email it, we'll email it, yeah.
No, I'm gonna put it in the chat as Melanie suggested.
With her changes or not?
Just as
With,
it is, so
with
that
the
we can
will,
review.
I'm gonna make the changes that I suggested, and I'm gonna change the word from may to will. And after that, I think it's up for discussion. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay. Does it show? Look in chats. Dick, do you see it?
I'm no, I don't see it yet.
Maybe I didn't. I mean, it's in my screen. I don't know how to send it.
Do you want me to try to copy it in the chat for you?
I did, and it's in there.
It doesn't show on my chat.
Okay.
Is it addressed to everyone?
Yep. Okay.
Okay, let's
There
see.
it
I
is.
just stuck it in. Did you guys see it here?
Yep, there it is.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. It's obviously formatting's a little bit weird.
Yep.
I did not add in that other piece that's
So
missing.
you put it in?
I did. Yep.
Okay.
And if, I guess, David, if you can tell Randy what you added right around the word concerns, she could change it, couldn't she?
I don't
Yes.
think I can, but this is what I'll do. I'm going to copy it again, I think. And then before I send it, I'll make the change. Okay.
So
So
the opening statement where it says, whereas the COVID situation, the word should become will present
Oh, right, that's the
challenges.
second change, yeah.
okay.
And-
Yep.
And then the second change is under the resolution, if there are concerns, let's see.
Hold on. It only lets me look at this. Like, okay, if there are concerns,
Around any actions
around
taken.
any specific actions taken.
around any specific actions taken.
Comma, and then we will review. So
Okay.
that's all.
Was there a change up with the, or I don't know if you were considering making a change to the sequence that Rachel just suggested around the sequence of wording or not?
You mean close second?
Well, how about instead of saying close second, just say also? You know, they're equally important.
Well, let's make
All
sure,
right.
is everybody back before we start making changes?
Okay.
Yeah, well, it is been passed. Jane has her hand up.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jane.
As it relates to that, I guess I think the teachers as a whole know that they're serving students. Like if there's an emergency, they know that they have to protect. I think that this is, I do agree with, I think it was Melanie, I think that this is kind of divisive and makes it feel lesser than. When teachers already know their roles, if there's an emergency, they're going to automatically know to help protect their students. So I don't think it
Can I
needs to
jump
even be
in?
stated.
Hang on. John has his hand up first.
I missed, yeah, maybe I missed the initial idea, the impetus behind this. You know, we had the policy last time we approved, last meeting. I have a follow-up question or thought, but I'm just curious, what was the initial, what do we see as the goal of this resolution?
Dave, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, I thought we've already said that. The goal of the resolution is to underline, Deb asked if the delegation of authority to the superintendent satisfied all that. And in many ways it does. But Randy's also been stating about how many teachers are very concerned and people are not sure what's going on. And there's a lot of, with the uncertainty, I thought that a message from us that supports the teachers and supports the superintendent in making decisions in real time. I mean, Jane's point about being in an emergency is very accurate. And in those situations, I think it's even more important to put the authority in the hands of the person on the ground. And so even though we have the authority as a board overlooking, we don't want to get in the way and we don't want to slow down Randy. And more important, we want to send a message to the teachers that we do support them and that we allow that they can work with Randy and they can find the best solutions. And the reason why I don't want to, I mean, we can change the whereas a close second. We can change that wording. It wasn't meant to be divisive. It was actually meant for the opposite reason, which is because everybody knows, as Jane pointed out, that that's why they're there is for teachers. So yes, even though we're there to support the students, the teachers and staff are just as important. So they're close second. So that's why I put that in there. So it's more of a positive rather than a negative. So if there's wording that makes that message come across more clearly, then please put it in.
All right, I'm going to just jump in and add this revision with those revisions we just talked about, just so you've got an updated one to look at.
Thank you. Okay. And then John, you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to make sure I understood the intent. And David, I agree with you. As a teacher myself, I see that I feel a close second to students, their well-being. So I don't disagree with that. And I think it's what is in the content is, well said and needed. And I'm just wondering, if I'm reading as a teacher, not knowing the board in the form of a resolution, will that be, will come across as impersonal? And I don't want to bog us down, but it would a better form be in the form of a letter, a little bit, more personalized. I don't know. I just don't. And again, this is not. It doesn't. I don't want this to be a time suck, but I'm kind of curious from you guys to see if like a resolution, will that come across? Does it come across as for someone who's not, not on boards and is not familiar with resolutions? Some teachers may not be. Does it come across as too impersonal, or does that not matter?
Thoughts on that, Melanie?
I guess my question is that, to resolve that, is it necessary that those are broken out in two statements? Could they just be one statement? So the success of our children is the highest importance, as well as the well-being of our teacher, staff, and administrators.
Jane put a suggested change in the chat, and Jane, you also had your hand up, so go ahead.
You turned yourself off.
Jane, you're muted.
There we go. Right? Okay, thank you. So Melanie, that's exactly what I thought. I was thinking that we could do just an and. Can we modify it to where we say success of our children, teachers, staff, and administrators? It equalizes it. They're all important. They all know their respective roles when a crisis happens.
Mm-hmm.
Deb?
Yes,
And Randy.
I also like that we affirm our stand that all our kids are all our kids, and our first goal is to prioritize all our children and all of that. So we do need to keep that in there.
I just
mean you keep it separate?
No, put it in with and, and, the well-being of our teachers is also of paramount importance. Whatever Jane said, or whatever you said, Melanie, where you just combined them.
I wanted to just follow up on what John said. I think I will share that the feedback I've received, actually probably an unexpected amount of feedback from people who commented about the more, I guess, what's being seen as more personalized human approach to communication around what we've been going through this summer. Many teachers have commented that, they're seeing things from other places or hearing from colleagues that it's a little bit more formal or cool, and they appreciate the more personal approach. And so to John's point, I think that it might be worth considering that, just because I've received feedback from people directly related to what John's referencing.
We don't have the minutes of our last meeting yet, so I'm not sure exactly how much leeway we gave ourselves, but I'm wondering whether we actually need to act on this during this meeting. Deb and then John.
Were you thinking, Randy, that you would write a letter that affirms all of this from the board, because I'm not sure that as a board, do we have the authority to actually write to the staff? I mean, we deal with you, not with them individually. Would that be stepping on toes or overstepping our boundaries to, as board members, to write directly to the staff?
Mhm.
I think under policy governance, Deb has a point. I think that the superintendent could write a letter saying the board wants you to know the following things, but not a letter direct from the board. No. Who had their hand up next? I forget now. I think it was John and then Melanie.
Yeah, maybe a way to, a creative way, maybe not so creative, but to personalize this would be once we had an adopted resolution, if, we felt comfortable, then some of us or all of us videotape us reading it, and it just I think it's hard for, especially now where you can't go to meetings and everything's online. We see a resolution for whoever the reader to put faces to it, and I just think that we all care so much about the well-being of the faculty, administrators, students. Just an idea that think about how can we part of our community engagement to show our faces and it's and to show that we care. These are more than just words in a resolution.
Go ahead, Mark.
I think what John's,
well,
I think what John's trying to get to is how do you humanize a statement? And that's really the question here. The statement is good. How do you humanize it to the teachers so that they understand that the superintendent has all the support from the board, even though there's no interaction from board to faculty?
Go ahead, Melanie.
Yeah, I just want to say, am I muted? Nope. I also think this needs to get out to the greater community, not just our staff and our teachers. I think it's important parents know. I think it's important our community understands what our role and perspective is and understands, the willingness of us as a board to hand this over to Randy, and that we trust her. And that's, that's where their children's decisions are being made.
I have a question for Celeste. Was there a second to David's motion?
Well, there is no Celeste.
Oh.
You got Randy, who's the backup, which, but yes, there was. David made the motion and Dick seconded it.
Other discussion?
I'd like to jump in.
Sure.
So in two things, in terms of humanizing it, I do think that that's what Randy does. So we as a board make a formal statement that gives it gravitas. That's our role. And in fact, we can put a statement in front that we as a board are proxy for the entire community. And as proxy for the entire community, we recognize this situation. We recognize that there will be challenges. We recognize the importance of our kids and teachers. And so that's how we bring the community in, by acknowledging that we're not just a board, we're spokespeople for the entire community. And as such, we want to make a formal statement of support to through the superintendent, to the teachers and to the students. And so Randy then can do what she's been doing so well, which is, I want to share with you this resolution that I received from the board. I'm very pleased and impressed by their pure, clear, and unadulterated support of everything that we're doing. And they want us to do the best job we can, and they recognize the incredible challenges that we're facing together. So you use this as an opportunity, Randy, to humanize it as you've been doing, and we're giving you a tool, we hope, to help you set the tone at the beginning of the year. That's what I'm trying to achieve here, what I think we're all trying to achieve.
Are we ready to vote, or is there more discussion? Deb, and then Jane.
Did you see Rachel's suggestion? That pulls it together.
Is it in the chat?
Yeah, whereas well-being and educational success of our students and the well-being of our teachers, staff, and administration and the community are of the highest importance. You know,
And that would substitute for the
second.
second and third whereases, right?
Okay,
Yeah,
David, you're the maker of the resolution.
Yep.
Is that change okay with you?
yes,
Is it okay with the second?
Yes.
Okay. And I think Jane had a comment. You'll need to unmute.
Thanks. I don't want to belabor this, but so maybe someone can help give me some comfort here on something. I know that, just to share a little bit where I'm coming from with my previous concern, that I'm a little concerned about at what point, Randy, you know, and what your team is. I know that you've described some of the players on that team, and I can appreciate one person being in the middle of the hub, but I just feel like this is a good case in point. Like, for instance, when the report that first came out, what the plan to return to school was, and I saw that at first there was that people could use, that schools could use water fountains. And to know that this plan thus far had already gone through Levine, it had already gone to the Secretary of Education. And the concern there, and the reason why I think this is a really salient point, is because with this being an infection that's transmitted through droplets, it was really important to me to know that water fountains really do get handled in a different way. And to this point, when I even called Levine's office to express concern, the assistant told me that no one had made this point before. And she said, you know, luckily this is still a draft. And I know that these are not incompetent people, but I'm just saying it concerns me that we're moving quickly on an issue that is an infection, and that people at the very top were missing something that is usually considered an immediate factor that has to be taken care of in the beginning. So I get a little concerned of knowing how this plays out a little bit, and how soon afterwards, if something happens, how soon does that get shared with the board or with the community to help out. I mean, I know I felt personally and professionally as a nurse that it was incumbent for me to call the Department of Health and to state a concern about water fountains. And even when the epidemiologist and I asked this question at the annual workshop, it had not really been considered. I felt like I read on her face that she was surprised. And so, again, this is not to say anything disparaging about anyone. It's about the process, about how important it is to be working as a team, and what goes down, how quickly decisions, and who's helping to make those decisions. And again, anything that people can offer, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
I think you can control what you can control. We're not going to be able to successfully, as a small board, challenge the competence or expertise of people way outside of our orbit. I think that what I'm coming down to, and why I think David has proposed this and why I seconded it, is that we want to state that we trust the superintendent to constantly review the best advice available. And if the advice was initially given to have kids use water fountains, that was relatively quickly corrected. And the superintendent doesn't make, I don't think, decisions with respect to the health and well-being of our kids without considerable dialogue and discussion. And so therefore, I'm a little less concerned with the breakdown of stuff that we can't control and rather depend on the intelligence and desire to make the best possible set of decisions. And if those prove to be incorrect, to make a quick course reversal to make sure that we get the right outcome. I think that Melanie's revision is excellent, and I think it makes the point that we trust the superintendent to manage within the best possible set of parameters what it is that needs to be managed on behalf of everybody concerned. So I'm a little less concerned that Levine got it wrong at the start, because actually I trust Levine will get it eventually right. And I think our superintendent is well aware of that. So I'm not as concerned, Jane, about what else is going on. I think that we can only deal with what we can deal with, and that is how to manage the situation the best way we can within the framework of our own system, as humanly and efficaciously and intelligently, based on the best available science, making decisions. And so I feel very confident that this is the right way to go.
Melanie has your hand up.
I have 3 points I think will help, and I'm probably going to only remember 2 by the time I'm done. But one is, I think, Jane, some of the comments you're making and the analogies you're drawing already are kind of outside of our scope, in that we, by running policy governance, we're really only reiterating what we're already committed to doing, which is giving Randy the power to supervise without us micromanaging what she's doing. I think the second point is that this doesn't in any way, I think, inhibit us from making suggestions to Randy, right? Anybody in the community, anybody from this board could at any time say, hey, Randy, I see this policy. Did you consider this? It looks like you might have missed this point. I don't think that keeps us silenced in that way. And I think we're all, at all times, everybody should be encouraged to reach out if there's ideas like you had mentioned about the water fountain bit. And the third point, which I knew I was going to forget, is that I think this by making the statement, if I'm not mistaken, David, please correct me on this. I think the real intent of this is to kind of undo the statement that the governor made a couple weeks ago about how boards are supposed to facilitate. And I think what we're trying to achieve, or at least what I understand, what we're trying to achieve by this, is make sure that if Randy decides she needs to close the school today, she does not have to wait for a warned board meeting 24 hours later in order to do that, if there needs to be an immediate decision. And that's kind of where I feel a statement like this is important, that people understand we're not going to be stuck, in the middle of an outbreak, Randy not being able to make the move she needs to move because we need to approve something.
Are we ready to vote on the resolution as it appears in the chat, or is there more discussion?
David's had his hand up. I don't know if
No, I'm good. I'm approving what Melanie said, and I think we're good.
Anybody else?
Deb?
Deb?
Yeah. Does that include the revisions that Rachel suggested?
Let's see.
I think they're all in there.
I think I copied it all into another document, because apparently we lose the whole chat. So you want me to share? Can I just share my
substitution is in the chat, so we certainly can figure out how it ought to read.
I know, but we're going to lose that when we end our meeting. Can I just show you the statement that I copied and adjusted based on the input I read from the chat?
Actually, I think it's possible to file what's in the chat, but go ahead anyway.
Oh, I'm flying solo today, so so let me make this a little bit bigger for you.
looks like you caught everything. Anybody see anything missing?
In the second sentence, I think it should be are instead of is.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, grammar's not my strong suit, guys.
I meant to grab that and forgot to change it. So.
And you need to put a return after policy governance.
Okay, I wasn't sure because it didn't copy correctly. So perfect. I was thinking
Thank
there was
you.
something.
Should there be semicolons at the end of each whereas statement?
There should.
Okay, see this, you're great. Look at you go. Okay.
Lessons learned, one word.
I don't think so.
No.
In the last sentence.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's meant to be separated. Thank you.
Any other comments? And again, I can't see everybody, so you're just gonna have to unmute yourself and speak.
I can stop screen sharing if people have had a chance to read it. Thank you for all your input on this.
No, it's fine. But remember that I did make a comment that, and maybe you put it in your statement, Randy, but if it's helpful to acknowledge that the board acts as a proxy for the entire community. So you're interpreting this as support from the board, but also support from the entire community for the efforts of the school system.
Mm-hmm.
Could I suggest that if Randy puts this in a letter to staff, that she can put that in there?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we ready to vote? No, we're not. Melanie has her hand up.
I just wanted to check if there's support in making sure this gets out to the community at large as well.
Okay. Anybody else? All
Just
right.
a question for David. When we serve as proxies, is that also, as advocates for on the legislative level, advocates for the community as far as the state legislature goes, and any state government?
Dave, you want to speak to that?
Well, if you're asking me if I think the board should be active in the legislature and promoting things, absolutely. So yes, I guess I do say that. Why?
I was wondering if that's, do we need to spell that, or is that something that Randy can communicate, that we plan to advocate for, either to our legislator or, legislative delegation or the governor or whomever, that we will advocate on the behalf of the community. Maybe that doesn't need to go in there, but.
I think under policy governance, Randy certainly has the ability to say that, because policy governance does include communicating with our legislators. Anybody else want to speak before we have a vote on this? Deb.
I just wondered if Bob Niles could help us disseminating this.
Let's wait and see whether it passes first.
Okay.
Anybody want to speak to whether we should pass this or not? Jane. Remember, this is confined to whether we should pass the motion, not to what we do after we pass it.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay. And so this is probably directed more so at Randy. Can you tell me, like, if there's an issue that comes up around transmission or the aspect of having to deal with the medical, when you're making a decision around that, I know that you had mentioned that you're in consult with the Department of Health. Is there anyone specific that, like, before you make a decision that you really turn to for that kind of immediate attention, even if there's information that is contrary? I just was wondering who your team is, like, when you're making that kind of decision.
So I'm connected as very quickly as possible with Dr. Brina Holmes at the Department of Health. We are also consulting regularly with a pediatrician in Bennington, and we consult with Kathleen O'Reilly with the Department of Health in Bennington. So those are my 3 key points. Should there be an outbreak or a positive case or a presumed positive case in our schools, I will immediately reach out to Dr. Holmes, and then I will also call the Department of Health if for some reason she's not available.
Thank you. I just want to point out that one of the concerns that's been said throughout the country is how nurses in general have not been included in the beginning of processes with planning. They're starting to be included, but it's within like a month before going back to school throughout the country.
So you understand our situation, Jane, that
Yes.
I've had nurses involved from the very beginning of phase 1 and that they've been actively involved in the process. I've got 2 lead nurses that have been working all summer extensively and attending regular nursing meetings, town hall meetings, consulting with the Department of Health. They've been instrumental in all of our planning. So I understand that there are a lot of things happening in other places that are not necessarily our experience within RSU.
But yet we have like what, 5 or 6 new positions opened up for nursing roles in this district? Is that correct?
Nope, we're looking to hire either an LPN or a bachelor level at Sunderland.
Thank
I'm
you for
not
that
sure
clarification.
what you're referring to.
Okay. I thought it was said earlier in the last meeting that it was like 5 positions. So I apologize if that was a misunderstanding.
Yeah, that's not accurate.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think you're muted, Herb.
My phone was ringing, so I muted myself. Thank you. All right. Anybody else want to be heard? I don't see any hands. I'm going to call for a vote then. All those in favor of the resolution as it appears in the chat, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Let's see, 1. Is anybody abstaining? If you're abstaining, raise your hand. Okay, the minutes should show that passes, but with opposition. The next item would be to appoint a new member to the board. And I think email everybody has gotten a copy of letters from Jean Sanataro. Is that right, Dick?
I haven't
And
received
Alex
anything.
Wild.
I haven't received any applications or anything like that.
Neither have I.
Either.
Oh. Maybe I should read them aloud. They're fairly short. Anybody have any preference about how we handle this? Okay, I'm going to read Alex Wild's. This is addressed to Celeste Keel. I would like to put myself forward for consideration to fill the vacant position on the Taconic and Green Regional School District Board. My wife and I moved to Danby so our children could be closer to their grandparents. We have 2 children, a 3-year-old boy and a 14-month-old girl. Wait a minute here. This is being recorded, isn't it? I'm
Yes.
just wondering whether I should be recording this as a public record.
I don't
should.
I don't feel like this is, without us being, notified ahead of time of what we're and who we're voting on, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me to do this in this format.
Yeah, I'm reluctant to. I think the way that this needs to be handled is that the board needs to get these 2 letters, but in a confidential manner. It's too bad because I would like to have a new member on board when we meet in September. Anybody have any suggestions?
Can we vote in any other, later in any other way? Do we have to be convened to vote?
Let me suggest this.
What about after
What
lunch?
about, we're going to break from noon to 1. During that time, could somebody at the SU send us these 2 letters by email, and we could continue our business meeting to go right after lunch to deal with just that, that way we would not have to discuss as a public record what the letters say.
I just sent them.
Okay.
The deadline was too recent for the packet.
Yeah,
And they should have been
deadline
forwarded.
was until Monday.
Right.
So what I would like them to do is when we resume after lunch to take that up as the last item of the business meeting. Would that be okay with everybody? I don't see anybody objecting anyway. All right, let's do that then. And there are 2 ways we can handle this. We can either break early for lunch, or we can keep going till noon or whatever time everybody prefers with the first item of the retreat. and then resume the business meeting just for the purpose of appointing a new member. Anybody have any preferences one way or the other?
I do.
Go ahead, go.
I have a recommend. I'm concerned about the time that we have remaining in the agenda for the retreat. So I would like to recommend that we maybe stop for lunch now, so that maybe you and I can have a conversation about how we might recommend that we adjust the agenda, and then we can come back at whatever time we determined and go from there.
Well, we'll have to tell people what time the rest of everybody should be back on screen.
Right.
So if we break now, Randy, how long do you think our discussion is going to have to take, so that I can tell when everybody else needs to?
Oh, I don't think it'll take very long. I think you should just determine as a board what time you want to return.
Could I suggest we all come back at, is 12:45 okay rather than 1?
I need
12:30.
I need 1 o'clock.
I may be missing until 1 also, because I plan phone calls during that.
Okay.
That's the
And I
same
have
here.
a meeting from 12 to 1 that I made before coming onto the board and knowing of the retreat.
Yeah. So let me suggest a little change. The very first item in the retreat was ends policy development. We've already discussed that considerably.
Well, the question, the reason it was on there was to consider the plan you want to use for community involvement around ends policy development this year, jumping on, because we tabled it last spring. So it's the community engagement work.
So what I'd suggest is, how about if we keep going till noon with everybody on that, break till 1, and then right after noon, Randy and I, maybe joined by Dick and Dave, can figure out how to rearrange the rest of the agenda.
Sure, that's fine with me.
Let's do that then. So
everybody did get a copy of what we agreed to before COVID interrupted the process.
Right, it's packet page 27 and 28, I believe. Or no, just 27.
So I think we did establish when we could meet with the public, and I'm not sure when we're going to be able to meet with the public at this particular point. I don't know where you want to go in developing community partnerships without consulting the public as we desired.
Well, let me suggest this. If we could all look at packet page 27,
That's the additional page that I emailed you, so it's not part of the board packet. So just.
Oh, I thought this, well, there is a community engagement next steps on page 27 of the packet.
I don't know. I emailed it to you, and it is packet page 27, but it's updated on January 31st. I pulled it from from previous meeting agendas.
Has there been an update since the 31st of January?
You know what? It's possible, but I was trying to find the most recent one, and it is possible with everything going on that this is not the most recent. But Ben and Deb certainly were a part of this process, and this is what was presented to the board and what we had talked about in February.
Maybe Ben can help us out with this.
Yeah.
Well, I know that this was presented at that time and right before COVID, and then we did have some further discussion at a later date, and specifically talking about using the profile of a graduate as a vehicle for community engagement around developing an ends policy. But we did not revise any of the timeline or the process. I mean, the process we did discuss modifying in that sense of using that specific tool rather than what we had initially presented. So I do feel like this is pretty much like we need to sort of like take what we had and put it behind us and say, what are we gonna do now? I mean, not disregard all that work that went into it, but the world is really different than it was, and I think we need some different kinds of community engagement than we had talked about then, and with some different purposes. I mean, so I think this is a bigger discussion about what's our role as a board here at in this time.
So Ben and Deb, do you think we should even be working from packet page 27, or do we need to start all over again?
I don't know, is there any of it that we can keep? You're right, it's a whole new story now. We can't do public meetings.
Well, we can by Zoom. The question is, how effective are they going to be?
Can I jump in? I just want to say, it sounds like Randy has been pretty actively engaging the community through small hubs and small groups, and bringing that information together while she's been kind of developing or going back to school policies, right? I would be really interested in hearing, and maybe Randy, you're probably not ready to necessarily bring that to us now, but find out how you designated those groups, see if your process might be something that we can mimic since it was done during the time of COVID. Working in small groups first, taking volunteers, and then bringing that to larger groups and sharing that information across. And maybe that's kind of a model that we need to use so that we can still actively engage with the community in a different way.
Yeah, what Melanie's saying is let's use Randy's experience to inform how realistic any of this still is, right?
Right. I mean, yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Go ahead, Mark.
My concern is that the community engagement may get very sidetracked by COVID discussions at this point in time. It may not be as effective as we really want because people have other concerns that they really want to talk about, and we may not be effective in this effort.
I would
think about that.
But I would caution to.
Could I ask you could I please ask you to raise hands, Melanie?
I don't think necessarily, though, that we should not engage for fear of that it would be led by COVID. I think it might be worth at least giving it a shot, seeing if we can start to direct, some engagement. If we find it's totally derailed and we need to put it off to the side, then sure, we'll visit that when we get to it.
Ben and then Deb.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's what I was starting to get at by saying, we may need to rethink what's our role as a board here in this time. I mean, we have a responsibility to develop the ends policies and to then make sure that they're being met. But do we also have a role as a board to be a liaison, a link to the community to understand what their concerns and needs are, not just in terms of ends policies, but in terms of what's their reality right now and how are schools, what's the role of schools during this time. And it's a little bit of a broader piece, but again, part of my question is what's the board's role in this and what's the role of schools? There have been a series of community meetings that Neil and the folks at Floodbrook have held over the past couple of weeks. And that's been the most community engagement that we've, that publicly, openly accessible for this community that there has been for quite a while. And there have been a lot of people that have shown up to those meetings and with a lot of questions. And I think anything that we do right now is going to feel pretty similar. There's just going to be a lot of questions to ask. And that our place as a board is not necessarily to be able to answer all of those detailed questions. I think it's really important that we're in the listening role there, and that we try to keep the big picture of the ends policies that we're looking at on that grand scale. But the questions and worries that people have are much more specific, and there's still a real desire for more information on what is this actually going to look like? What are the days going to look like? What are the hours going to look like? Is there actually not going to be recess because that's what it sounds like right now? And is there not actually going to be any specials because that's what it sounds like right now? I mean, those are, these are the questions that I'm hearing that are coming up. Going to have to and worrying about. And so to talk about these big lofty goals is I don't that's where.
I think we kind of lost Ben off and on, but Deb, do you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I agree, Ben, that those are the questions people want to ask. I mean, before all of this COVID hit, I met with the Western Select Board. It was a group of people who, some of them have kids in school, but some of them don't. They're really a diverse group. And I was just really impressed at how interested they were, how much they wanted to contribute, how they sort of felt left out, but were glad that we were asking them, and that they had some really constructive suggestions. I don't know that we'll be able to do that again soon, but one of the things we had in our original steps at the end was to gather together a small group of, or a representative group from each town, and try, people, because one of the problems is trying to get people to come. If you just have a meeting like they did in Danby, people are busy and they just don't show up, except for parents at school, but other people, just don't show up. But when I met with the select board, there were a couple of people who were really interested in pursuing this and contributing however they could. So I don't know if it's worth looking for people in each community who might want to participate, a smaller group in a very large room, or I don't know what. But it's nice to get input from all of the community, not, including parents, but also including people without kids.
Just to inform our afternoon planning, let me just do a straw vote here. If you think that we shouldn't be proceeding with community engagement until something different happens with the pandemic, if you think we should just stop working on this, could you raise your hand? And who thinks that we should keep working on it in some fashion? It's like a slight, a majority. Okay, so we'll plan to continue that in the afternoon, and then I'll call on John. Go ahead, John.
Can I make a suggestion along the same lines as Deb? I think it's, coming up with a plan as a large group, in such with the environment being so complicated, might be challenging. Could I suggest a small working group to put together, from this board to really put their heads together and dig in and, bring a concrete plan, proposed plan to the board at a future time.
Anybody have any thoughts on that? Randy.
John, are you suggesting a small stakeholder group to specifically talk about how might we approach community engagement across any topic?
I was thinking more I think that could be, I guess, either or. I was thinking more in lines of what was on the agenda, but I think just a community, maybe it's a community engagement working group. I don't know. I think it's, with the pandemic, this is so difficult for us to figure out and, and find creative solutions in this manner. And I'm just thinking if, working with a smaller group, working with Randy could be more effective in coming up with, some really thoughtful, constructive community engagement guidelines and proposals.
It's almost noon, so let's hold that thought and see if we can pick up with it when we resume at 1. Is that okay with everybody? And I'm going to stay on. Randy will stay on. David and Dick, if you can, why don't you stay on? And we'll see everybody else at 1. Session.
Okay, here we go. It's recording.
Thank you for resuming our session. Herb, you did it off the recording, so I'll just make note of the fact that you did, and move that we go into executive decision for the purposes of discussing the applications to replace our departing board member.
All right, is there a second? Seconded by Deb, okay. All in favor of going into executive session to discuss replacing the board member who resigned, could you please raise your hand?
You can see me now.
Yes, I can see you. Yeah, and your hand. Okay. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand.
You're opposed?
Now, I think what happened is I think there's a time lag there. Rachel, you weren't opposed, were you? Yeah, there was a time lag. Okay.
I was
Okay,
not.
so
Sorry, I
I'll
was
pause
fixing
it.
my name.
So that passes unanimously, and we're now in executive session. And
Placement be done at random by the superintendent choosing one of two names that will be put in a mug, and she will shake them up and do whatever she has to do so that it is as random as possible. Because both candidates are equally qualified.
is there a second?
Second.
Second by Deb, I think. Okay. All right. All in favor of the motion, which simply says how we're going to choose to fill the vacancy, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed to that method, please raise your hand. And is there anybody abstaining? I didn't see Jane's hand one way or the other yet. Okay, Jane. Okay, so we have, I think just because of the rules on electronic meetings, I need to call a roll in because it isn't unanimous. So either say yes or no or abstain. Deb? Oh, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to,
Yes.
I'm gonna have to unmute when you answer these things. Okay, so Deb says yes. David?
Yes.
Rachel?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Lindsay, you have to unmute.
Yes.
Mark, unmute.
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Ben?
Yes.
Melanie?
Yes.
Jane?
I feel I need to abstain just because I just came into the meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so
vote yes.
passes with one. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't call on Dick, did I? Dick?
Yes.
Okay. So passes with one abstention.
I missed who seconded that motion from Dick. I'm sorry. It was
I think
It was Deb.
Deb. Okay.
Okay, I think that takes care of the business part of the meeting, doesn't it?
Well, we haven't done the vote. Or
To draw the person
I
in.
beg your pardon, yeah, that's
were
right.
they doing that? Okay.
You're right.
So I
Okay.
have two pieces of paper.
Mhm.
They're both going in the cup. Trying to figure out how to open this for you.
Alex, I think it says.
Yep.
So the minute should show that the member chosen was Alex Wild. And could I suggest, I don't know whose job it is to tell both of them who we picked, but I would say that the person we didn't pick ought to be encouraged to run in March anyway. And is it my job or whose job is this?
I am not sure, but we'll get that answer.
Okay. All right. I don't think we actually need a motion to adjourn because it's still a meeting, even though it's also a retreat, unless somebody feels strongly that we do.
So we had picked up with item B.
Yes.
There was a suggestion about going forward in terms of community engagement, and I believe that was going to be predicated on developing a model. And the suggestion before we left was to establish a small subcommittee to think through the multiple ways of engaging the community given the current situation.
I would agree, except that it's not a subcommittee because there's no big committee. It's just a committee.
Right, okay. Well, it's a subcommittee of the whole.
That's confusing. Anyway, everybody, I think grasps the idea to create a smaller body to do what Dick described. Thoughts on that?
All for it.
Go for it, Melanie says, yeah. You know, it may be just as well that we didn't adjourn the business meeting, because I think it does take a vote to establish a committee.
Do we have a committee already? I mean, wasn't Ben and someone else,
Jay was
Jay,
on it.
part of? And Deb?
And Deb, yeah.
Deb and Jay were part of it. Well, they were the committee.
I mean, is that committee dissolved, or is it just an extension now of kind of defining new work for that committee?
Good question. What's anybody think? Ben?
It's like Ben's got.
Yeah, we didn't ever officially dissolve the committee, but it was, you know, the whole process went sideways. So I would be happy to continue to work with another group. Jay is obviously has resigned since then, so we would need at least one other person to join that group. And we were working pretty closely with Jackie. So again, this is a question if Randy, you know, depending on your time and what's going on right now, ability to meet and have conversation about this. So, but I'd be, as an individual board member, I'd be happy to continue to meet with that group.
Deb, are you interested in continuing?
Sure. This is a sort of we would only draw up suggestions for the board to consider. I mean, we wouldn't be making.
John?
Yeah, I would be interested in working with this group, and if you guys wanted me to. And, you know, I think it might be helpful for whoever's on the group, if there is one, to potentially have some directives from the board. And maybe because of my guilt for being late and getting the time screwed up, I took it upon myself to, you know, put together some ideas. But if that's not appropriate, you know, ideas of directives, and if that's not appropriate right now, you know, it only took me about 15 minutes. But it's, you know, rather than us hammering everything out, as far as community outreach as a larger group, it might be good to spend, if we have a group, to spend a little time on directives for that group, working group.
Let me suggest this. Let's have a motion first to continue the committee and put John on it, since we have Jay who resigned. And then once that passes, then I'd like to hear John's ideas. Is that
so moved?
Okay, moved by Dick to add John to the community engagement committee.
I would also be interested in being on the committee, unless 4 is too many.
Okay with you, Dick?
Yeah.
We had Melanie also. Is there a second to that? Seconded by Rachel. Any discussion? All those in favor, could you please raise your hand?
Before we go, I do want to just, I am in favor, and I don't want to turn this sideways, but I'm channeling Jay, because he was always one to bring up that, like, what is our actual ability to form committees and subcommittees under policy governance, and I fully admit to not being the expert in all the minutia of policy governance to say, but we ended up with this sort of a committee, but it wasn't an official committee, and I don't know what the language is, and I don't know that it honestly matters, but I don't want to be, you know, like, I don't want to create a mess out of something.
We call it a working committee.
There actually is policy governance, policy about committees, and it says when they're used, they'll be assigned so as to reinforce the wholeness of the board's job and never to interfere with delegation with the board to the superintendent. And says that, you know, they can't exercise authority all by themselves, and they'll be used sparingly, and it applies to any group that's formed by board action, whether or not it's called a committee. I actually had reviewed this when I was writing my report, and I think that the motion is fully consistent with policy governance. So we have a motion made and seconded, and I was just calling for a vote. Once again, if you are in favor of the motion, which is to add Melanie and John to the committee, And could you again raise your hand, please? And that is unanimous, it appears. Thank you
I
very
don't know
much.
if you can see Jim. Jim, did you vote?
Oh yeah, Jim disappeared.
Has Jim come in yet?
He was here just a while ago.
Yeah.
Because I called on him, remember?
Yeah, so
Well, it's unanimous of those who are attending right now, evidently. Jim, are you with us?
Is it, can I jump in? Well, just, it was raised earlier just about my capacity. And I guess I would ask if, I definitely would like to be involved, but I'm wondering if we can wait until after our September 1st meeting to hold the first discussion.
I think it's up to the committee to
mhm.
go along with anything reasonable. And Bob Niles probably should continue to be involved in some way too. Okay, well, I would like to hear what John's notes say. Is that okay with everybody? If you go for it.
You hear me? Okay, so I'll just put in the a link to the Google Doc I was just working on. And again, you know, maybe some of these things aren't in line with policy governance, and I'll try to. Does it make sense? How do I? Am I able to share my screen even though I'm not a host?
I believe I can, or whoever is
I think you can.
host will let you do that, yeah.
I think a lot of people
anyone know how I do that?
Yeah, hold on. Here you go. Now for sure you can do it. Go ahead.
Okay.
You go to screen share.
Green button in the middle of the bottom menu bar.
Nah, it's in the bottom menu bar, but it says screen. What's this? What should it say?
Share screen. And if you click on the arrow, it should allow you.
There we go. Now it just popped up now. Oh, sorry, I got to change my preferences here. But you guys hopefully open that link I put in the chat box. So I'm getting this pulled up.
Do you want me to try, John, to share?
I just have to give permission to Zoom for my. Yeah, if you can do it, Randy, it's probably faster. It's gotta make me quit to change my preferences.
Okay.
So
Are you just, John, are you just trying to share out the 8-point plan that you put together?
yeah, just the directives, and
Okay.
Randy's going to show it, and it's all linked in. So yeah, this is just kind of things that came off the top of my head, and 15, 20 minutes off during lunch, and just ideas for directives for the working group. And I'm not married to any of these, of course, and just thought it could be a starting place. The one thing I will highlight, I guess, would be we'll give you a second to read these, actually.
Do you mean September 2020 or September 2021
for
presentation?
I think Dick's talking about the item 8.
Yeah, this year. I was thinking, Randy just said that probably wait till after September, so maybe October, just for this working group, whatever it is, to come with their findings at some point to the board and say, okay, here are findings, here are our plans, and just present that to the board.
I rather than put a specific time, given all of the things that Randy's got to do, I would say as soon as possible.
How about in October or later?
Okay.
Okay.
And then probably needs to say regarding plan or something.
Yeah.
I think it might be helpful to the committee we just established if we said, if there were motions saying, these are at least some of the things that we want you to work on.
Well, that's a lot to chew.
Yeah, can I jump in here?
Yeah, I can't see everybody, so because I can't use grid view and screen share at the same time. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think one of the things we need to identify too is make sure that we identify who all the stakeholders are and what the different groups are that we need to reach out to.
Haven't we identified the stakeholders in some document?
No.
I know it's been discussed, but I don't remember seeing it in writing.
Well, maybe, yeah, can you guys hear me?
I say
yeah,
that
Mel,
because
maybe
I
that's
think
part of the work of the, you know, I think it might be
Right.
hard to do it. That's part of the work of the group, maybe? Is that what you're saying?
that's what I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
I could put as a placeholder here.
Identify stakeholders.
Yeah, I just think it's very important because
Yep.
each stakeholder group may require a different type of communication, right? So what we
Yep.
put together for one group won't not work for another. Or approach might need to be different.
There we go.
And I think, you know, I tried to put in here for the directives, it is now, where is it? You know, number 6 here. Just trying to think about, you know, ways that this community outreach could pivot quickly if, let's say, restrictions, you know, were lessened, and you know, just to be thinking about multiple futures, which is, you know, very difficult, but that's kind of what it means here.
Any comments, other suggestions? Remember, this doesn't have to be an exhaustive list.
Yeah, I just want to say too, like, be honest, you're not going to hurt my feelings here if this is a bad idea or anything on here is
Oh,
silly.
it's good.
So would somebody care to move that we ask the committee to maybe the words would be consider the 9 points that are in John's document?
So moved.
Moved by Dick. Is there a second? Again, I can't see everybody. So if you have a second and I can't see you, just raise your.
Here, I can stop sharing.
Okay.
Good for me to stop.
I think.
Yeah, can I add though?
Oh,
I don't see in there specifically is anything about the ends policies. Should that be outlined in there?
Yeah, I
was
tried to do a catch-all with where is it? Yeah, I thought about putting it. I had them in there first, and then I put where is it?
Just to be orderly about this, was there a second to the motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, seconded by Dave Chandler. Sounds like Dave anyway. Yeah.
Yep, it's me.
Okay, and now we do have a question.
Herb, I don't know if you're referring to me. I have my hand up, but you know, I know you can't see everybody. It seems that the bullet point number 1, though, is to develop measurable goals and success criteria for the community outreach in the next 12 months. One of those clear goals would be to engage the community around defining our ends goals, our ends policies. So I think that would be one clear goal. I think, you know, and then there would be others around supporting the community and understanding COVID response and whatever knows us. So.
Yeah, and that's you read my mind, Ben. I had the ends policy in there initially, and that was kind of the catch-all for that.
How about if the very first line read, possible directives for working group to help define ends policy?
I actually like the way it's written.
Me too.
Because it is broad. I think that does work.
They're coming back in less than 2 months, and this is an ongoing process and somewhat dependent on lots of different factors we can't control.
Okay, we have a motion made and seconded. Are we ready to vote on it? And I'll need to have the grid view back so I can see whose hands are up.
Can you just,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Randy.
who made the motion?
I did.
I did.
Dick. Okay.
I think David.
I seconded.
Yep, I got the second. Okay, thanks.
And I think before we vote, and you know, sorry Ben if you're going to kill me, but you know, if we want, I think it's good to have a kind of a leader of this group, and I think Ben, if he had the time, would be really well suited, given he has a lot of context and he's worked on this in the past, and be a great leader for this group. But I understand, Ben, if you're stretched, and sorry, I have to buy you a beer or 12 sometime.
Well, I'd be happy to be in the nominal leadership position of the group, but I definitely believe in working with a flat hierarchy on this sort of thing. So
And that's
but
why
I'll
you'd be
help- I'll
perfect.
help organize.
Yeah, anything else before we vote to ask the group to consider at least what was in John's document? All right, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. That passes unanimously then. Thank you. And let's see, is there anything else, especially this is directed to Dick and Dave, that we need to talk about under the community partnership ends policy development item?
No.
Great, okay. And Dick, can I call on you for the regional middle school item?
Just because my view, having done middle schools and school consolidations before, that there's an orderly process in order to bring a middle school on board, and that's usually between 5 and 7 years, and therefore I'll choose 6 as an average. Usually the process begins by an internal assessment by the educational leaders of the system with respect to, is this something that would be useful to explore and put in motion? And so therefore, what really it's doing here is to begin what I think will be a long process involving large numbers of steps before we get a middle school on board, beginning with the most important assessment. Is this something from the perspective of education, deemed by our educators, something that is worth exploring further? So I just would like to get it started, because nothing will happen until we get started.
Thoughts by other folks? Ben, and then Melanie.
I guess the issue that I have with talking about a regional middle school as a lead in any conversation is that it's setting out a target and then evaluating, is that the right target or the wrong target, rather than starting with the question of what do we need to do to best serve our students, and particularly those who are most in need. And I think and that may result in a conversation around a middle school, but it may not. And so I guess it may be this is a little bit of a semantics piece, but it may be a question of, rather than starting a 5-6 year process on discussing whether we ought to have a regional middle school or not, we may want to embark in a process that's evaluating how do we best serve our students in grades 6, 7, 8 in a very widely geographically dispersed district, and engage in that kind of conversation rather than start with a conversation around a middle school, because there are lots of other options of how to approach educating those students.
I would agree.
Melanie, did you want to say something? No, you're just resting.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know when Dan French came on originally as superintendent, he did a study as to whether or not we should shut Sunderland School down. And I think that was based on the need to cut funding or, cut the budgets and pay attention to, we already had identified a problem and we were looking towards a solution. And I think, to Ben's point, if the idea of a middle school does seem like the means to an end, and without having to identify what the end is that we're looking at, maybe we're getting a little ahead of ourselves and making assumptions.
Jane, did you want to say something?
Lindsay's hands up, Herb.
Okay, Lindsay.
I wasn't sure, or was the idea towards this to make MEMS the regional, or that wasn't even part of the discussion? Wasn't sure where we were even thinking of doing that.
Dick, do you want to speak to that? Or Mark?
Well, I kind of echo what Ben said. All we're trying to do right now is answer a question that hasn't really materialized right now. What's the need, not where, and I think we should identify what do we need, not where do we stick a middle school.
I would agree that Ben's process is a good process, and my personal feeling is that it is something that has been periodically discussed. And if you recall, Jackie at one point suggested that it might be a useful option to explore. But Ben, I think that establishing the best educational organization of our schools based upon the recommendation of the curricular leaders of our school might be perfectly good. I personally think it will end up with a middle school, but that's my own personal bias and perspective. I don't prescribe any other kind of objective. Then we need to really look a little bit longer term than if this process unfolds, then simply next year. It's a process that begins to unfold. And if the middle school is the option that ultimately emerges, that's fine. If it isn't, then a better option will emerge. But we need to begin that process from my perspective.
Other thoughts? Jane, yes. You'll have to unmute.
I just was saying that I think Randy had her hand up before me.
Oh.
It's okay.
Jane.
I was just gonna, I guess, comment that when I had organized the agenda, I had originally put this under community involvement. I think because my thinking was sort of similar to Ben's, which was, what is it that you as a board are representing your community, and a huge part of policy governance is what does our community think, and you're representing them. And so my thought was that question to the community: does the community identify any relevant educational needs that you would then bring back? So I don't know. I mean, there's, I guess, different ways to look at it, but I'm not sure how this fits into the community engagement discussion either.
Jane, and then John.
Thank you. So guys, thanks for being patient with me being new to the board. But I guess, and I may have missed it, Ben, and maybe Melanie, but I guess I just wondered if there had been a formal needs assessment done. And then if not, that if that's something that fits into that community engagement, the first step of doing, getting some sort of needs assessment.
John, did you want to say something? You'll have to unmute.
I just had a clarifying question, I guess, for Ben or maybe Mark. Speaking about the ends, is this means the ends? When we think about whether it's regional middle school or any new change of programming or buildings, whatever it may be, are the ends policies, are those are that's our guidance. So, we talked about using community engagement to fine tune those ends policies. Do we see that, like, those are the ends? We talk about means to an ends. Is there anything else outside of those ends policies that, that we need to be considering? I don't know if that's clear or not, but I just want to make sure, like, when we talk about what's the best, how do we meet these ends? And the means maybe being a regional middle school, the ends are the ends policies. Or am I wrong about that?
I think you're right, but I'll go ahead and call on Jane and then Deb.
So yeah, I was thinking the same thing, that the ends policies together with your resources, I would think is what, just like strategic planning is how you begin building a needs assessment. So that we are accountable in evaluating what we implement.
Deb?
Just for Jane and others, a little background. This has come up often over the years. I guess the two driving concerns, one are that the class sizes in our middle schools are pretty small. So when we were talking about actually the cost of having so many small classes spread out throughout the district, that was one of the concerns. And related to that, because class sizes are so small, we're limited in what we can offer. The perennial problem, at least at Floodbrook, or maybe at other schools, has been Algebra 1. We just can't offer Algebra 1 without all kinds of contortions. Doesn't really work. And that the thought was that if we had larger classes, we could offer, some schools have choral music, other schools don't. Some have a band, others don't. That was the concern, being able, two things. One, the cost of having so many small classes dispersed throughout the district, and the other more important concern was being able to offer kids the best that we can offer them. They're related.
Jim, we're on item 5C. John.
Yeah, Gary. I got it. Great.
I think, I'm with Deb too on that. The equity piece has always been important for me when it comes, that's how we help to achieve in our ends. Regional middle school could be a means to that. But kind of thinking, I think a lot of us have, these implicit biases on, how we feel about our schools and, how we feel about regional middle schools. And I'm just wondering, Randy could probably speak more to this. And, maybe this could go sideways, not be worth it at all. But just like how, some school leaders will have outside people come in and do walkthroughs in their building, just to kind of see things that they wouldn't ordinarily see. Would it be worth on a larger system-wide scale to get, some, I hate to use the word consultant because that kind of minimizes it, but it got someone to, whether it's a group, outside group, or someone, some expert that does not, not from the community, not someone like my mom who would be a bad choice because she, has been too tied into the community, but someone to come in early on and say, okay, and we say, here are ends policies, right? How do we achieve these ends? What can we do? And rather than leading them towards regional middle school, see what they come up with. Again, it could be a huge waste of time depending on the consulting group, but that's just a thought I'd throw out there.
Rachel and then Lindsay, I think.
Great. I'm going to apologize if I'm repeating something because I got slightly distracted with the work thing. But for me, this has always been about crafting how we communicate with our stakeholders. And that's always been a really big problem for me. That's why I ended up here. And I think that's like the real thing. There are people on this board who think maybe there's a regional middle school, or maybe we need to do this, or maybe we need to do that. I'd like to have there be a uniform set or methodology for how we gather information from our stakeholders, regardless of what the issue is, that we can repeat over and over and over again, so that it's gathering information about, when an issue happens or how we discuss it. So before a change to pre-K is made, there are 3 forums held every time to hear, or, you know, those types of things. And then the other thing is, I wonder how this intersects with policy governance and what Randy's role is. Like, she's governing our school district. If she does not feel that there needs to be a unionization of middle schools, is that for us to say? Is that for the community to weigh in on? Is that for Randy to say? Is she the one as the superintendent who's able to say, okay, well, we're effectively meeting our ends policies with these places that we have, or because of budgetary reasons, we should cut operating a school because that's costing too much? And how much of that is her? But really, for me, I want this group that we're talking about to be able to funnel and facilitate information gathering to provide the superintendent with a community-wide stakeholder view on all of these issues, regardless of whether it's a middle school or pre-K or budget or whatever it is. This should be able to be replicated issue by issue over and over and over again in a really simplistic way, so that we don't have to keep revisiting this, and so that we have an effective information gathering tool for the decision maker to make their decisions that they're making. So,
Right. And before I call on Lindsay and Melanie, I'd like to say I think that's a really good question, and it does bring up something that's a little inconsistent in the policies we adopted, because sandwiched into our policy governance policies is something that says that we take care of the budget, and by law I think we have to, but I don't know how you make budget decisions totally divorced from the issue of how many schools you're going to have and what kind either. Go ahead, Lindsay, and then Melanie.
Herb, can I hear from Randy in response to my thing? Because I would really like to hear what she has to say about what she thinks her role is and what we can do in this working group to facilitate gathering her the information she needs to give us the information that we need afterwards.
Right. No, thank you. And I that is exactly, Rachel, how I see it as well, which is why I see this as community engagement. And I think that for you as a board, if you were to have a consistent approach that you used, that would be sustainable over time, right? The community would come to understand that this is how you operate. And certainly many people talk about a middle school, but we don't really have a sense of how reflective that is of what people are looking for in the community, or do they identify a greater need within our educational system that might not have surfaced, that you then would bring. I'm imagining that you're doing community outreach, you go through your process, we then engage in a conversation which you're sharing with me, or we're developing together through whatever that community engagement process is. Hey, this is what our community is saying our needs are within our community. You discuss that as a board, I discuss it with you. And then at the end of the day, wherever you land on this is really our identified need right now, then I see that as my charge to say, okay, so now what are my many possible responses to responding educationally to that? That response might be budgetarily, it might be curriculum, it might be building infrastructure, it might be any of a host of possible responses to addressing that identified community need. That's where I feel like my responsibility begins in responding to what you've given to me as the need. So then we would have a mechanism, and part of that I think is that, as we look at I've got papers everywhere here, but as we look at the policies, how do I then monitor and give you the information that you're looking for? I think it's a good system, and I look forward to it. It's probably one of the things that I look forward to most about the work to come, is getting that really well established as part of the policy governance structure that we're using.
Lindsay, then Melanie, then Ben, then Jane, I believe. Lindsay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, I wanted to finish what my question was before it was shot down when I asked where we were thinking of it, because my concern that came in was the exact reason we had with pre-K. You can designate one place, but there's different communities out there in our district that have these different needs, and So that's why I was asking where we were thinking of it, because we do need to realize mountain towns may have different needs than Danby or Sunderland. So I just wanted to be able to finish my question out there before it was ignored again.
Melanie? You'll have to unmute.
Does anybody want to respond to Lindsay first before we move on? I mean, I can tell you from what I remember is that when we spoke of where it would be, we spoke of nobody has any idea where it would be. It's just a matter of should it be? And then when we decide if it should be, then the question is, where would it be and what would it look like? I don't think we ever, and I'm talking back when I was on the board 2 or 3 years ago, it was never really decided that there's one central location as of yet.
And there
It
would
was still the question of, are we going to do it?
Right.
Right. That was just if there was an idea of if this was brought up, if there was a reason it was brought up, because there was an idea of where the idea came from of where it was going to be, so that other towns or other communities needs and stuff could be considered. That was kind of what I was trying to get to, because I don't remember ever, at least past couple of times I've been on the board, that this was ever a discussion. So Melanie, you're probably right, it probably was 2 or 3 years ago when I wasn't on the board. So
right. So the point though that I wanted to, or the statement I wanted to make was just about, I know that it's in our board goals to address equity, and the idea of a middle school or even getting around this seems like an equity issue, and which my question I guess is who and how would we go about defining that equity? Is that something that we should ascertain through community engagement, or is that something that we wait for Randy to report out on with our ends policies? And, and I bring back the ends policies because equity is not really in the ends policies. That's something our board has to hold ourselves accountable to.
We already actually have defined equity. We did it while you weren't on the board.
Mm-hmm.
But it does relate, because anybody trying to engage with the community may want to try to figure out what they think is equitable using our definition.
Well, that's my question. So if we want to move forward with this, is this strictly a community engagement, or should we be addressing this? And I'm opening to thoughts on this. Is a 2-part thing where it's community engagement and a reflection on our ends policies and where we're falling short.
Okay, I think Jane and then John have some comments, and then Ben again.
Well, you had put me in line after Mel, but I hadn't spoken yet. So if I could just follow that, because that was exactly where my comment was going, was to say that this, our ability to engage in this process is both, it's a combination of community engagement that's really focusing on needs, not wants, and ends, not means. And that's our role as a board, is to really try to help surface that information from the broader stakeholder set. So I think that is part of the charge, or will be part of the charge of the community group, is to figure out how to go about some of that process, to set some of that in motion that the whole board can engage with. But it's pairing that with information that's coming out on whether we're from the superintendent reporting out from schools, whether we're meeting our goals. With equity, that is a critical piece of that. So we're not meeting any of our goals if we're not also doing that equitably, according to our definition. So the role, it is the task of Randy, when she's reporting out, to say, our students of meeting these goals that we're setting out in terms of dispositions and skills and academic proficiencies, to report out whether that's equitable. And so are we seeing that across for all students at all grade levels in all areas, or are we seeing real disparities or changes that are happening over time? So if Randy is reporting out to us that we're getting significant declines in performance in the middle grades, in whether it's any of those skill sets or dispositions or academic proficiencies, then we as a board have to say, all right, well, we need to really engage around that's a need that's being demonstrated to us through what's coming out of the actual student performance and the metrics that Randy is implementing. If we're also seeing that through community engagement, that there's a huge outcry around what's happening in the middle school, then that's a separate angle into this same conversation. I think those things have to be paired.
Thank you.
Can I just follow up on that real quick? Because I have a
Well,
question.
Jane's been waiting for a while, Melanie.
Okay.
Jane?
So a couple things. I'm not sure. I mean, I know that in government, the process of TQI, like quality improvement gets used. I don't know if the board or the district does anything like this, but in that process, you identify the stakeholders. The first thing you do is you identify stakeholders. You identify what's to be looked at, which is basically, usually the first step is a needs assessment. And then you go through the process. And the thing that's cool about that is that you identify all these different things, which would probably envelop reflection on the end policies. And with that, you then identify what are the overlapping places where you can affect change. What's the lowest, fruit to be born, to be bare. And it's a great way of reserving resources and maximizing involvement and consensus. And, the other thing I'll say about why I think a needs assessment is so much needed right now, or it seems, is because I think as it relates to a fiduciary responsibility of the board, if on down the road it's seen that a school or something is needed, potentially then we're looking at bond issues. And what better way to begin engaging and getting the community to be on board with something like that by already having had the benefit of a needs assessment. So I just thought I'd share that. And, I think with what John was asking about, I think that having someone, if need be, a consultant who's really trained in doing like TQI that could work with the board and Randy around making a needs assessment perhaps that can go out. And then the board and Randy taking that, whatever information comes from that would really serve us well in so many ways, including issues about equity and all kinds of things that overlap.
John, then back to Melanie. Well, you need to unmute, John.
Yeah, I'm all set. My point was, I'm all set.
Okay, Melanie and then Deb.
Yeah, I just want to, again, just reiterate and make sure that somewhere in the ends, because our ends policy doesn't specifically ask for equity to be addressed as far as, I know it's in our board goals, but equity is not used in the ends policy. So when Randy is reporting out to us how our students are achieving, I just don't, the schools haven't, I just want to make sure that's in there, and I don't know where it's in there and how that would be reported. And maybe Randy, you can.
Randy, do you want to speak to that?
So I believe probably all of you know that we have not focused on equity as a system. That this summer is the first time that we're doing that, in as directive a way as that we are. So I'm fully prepared to, if as we look at developing the work plan, to share with you the work that we're doing, and data, if that's what we decide that we want, if that's part of how the interpretation is of some of the work we're doing. I would expect and hope that you as a board keep that pressure on, that when I am reporting on ends policies, or when we are talking about curriculum, that you make it clear that you expect equity to be a focus of the reporting out that we do, because that is exactly what is going to help us to get to the change we want. When I go through warrants right now, just if they come to my desk, right, the warrants of all of our purchases, I'm going through and I am looking at curriculum purchases. And I've asked our principals to make sure that 50% of all print material is representing historically marginalized people. I am literally looking at the warrant, following up with an email, making sure that they've looked through and can confirm for me that this purchase includes what I've asked. Those are steps that we've never taken before. We're in the as you know, we're going through training this year. I'd be happy to report to you out on that. We are in the process of discussing an equity audit through our system, what that might look like, who might we have come in to do that. So all of that is the work that when you keep putting the pressure on me to share about equity, then I have the opportunity to share that with you. And I know I shared this at our last meeting, but our principals and I went through two trainings with them. And more than one principal said very clearly, I am really glad we're taking a system-wide approach, and that we're tackling our challenges and our issues head on. And it's going to be a long-term process. You are likely going to raise many issues around equity within our system that we will not have gotten to yet. But we've got issues. There's no doubt about it. I can tell you about probably just about every historically marginalized group and equity achievement gaps that we've got.
Thank you. Melanie, do you want to follow up on that before I go?
I do, only in that specifically, I think, one of the things in this discussion is regional equities as far as, what towns have access to what programming and how we're going to make sure that is equitably divided.
Right. And the challenge that we're going to have, you're going to see this as we develop the budget, is what we're facing fiscally. The decisions have to be made. And so, the questions really are, what are the priorities? And how do we approach we pay for what we value. We pay for what we prioritize what we value. So I will likely be coming with you in a different way than we have before around the budget, and talk to you about how do we prioritize what you value, and then what are we letting go of? Because we're going to have some very, very difficult decisions to make.
Deb, and then Jane, and then Rachel.
Yeah, thank you, Randy, because I was just thinking the same thing. We could ask the community, do they want a middle school? And you'd get all kinds of answers. Most of them some indifferent, some uninformed, one way or another. The only way we can ask them for an opinion is to spell out the options that Randy suggests. What do we value? How much will it cost? How do we serve our kids? So we do need the information from our education experts almost before we go to the public and ask them their opinion.
Jane, then Rachel, then John. You'll have to unmute.
Yes. So again, I just want to, first of all, can anybody answer the question if the board historically or any districts are you being asked to use any kind of quality improvement process?
I can tell you that from an operational perspective, it's inherent in the work we do around continuous improvement. There's a whole system embedded in that for continuous improvement that all of our schools follow.
Right, because I just want to say from, having experienced QI in a lot of different settings and whatever, it really helps, it helps everyone to learn the tools where decision-making is made. And like the questions about, Deb, that you had about priorities, it actually, some of the tools, the methodology will actually visualize, what the priorities are. And so it really builds consensus very quickly, and resources are maximized. And that's why so many business practices, including in healthcare, take on QI methodology. I just think we could really benefit from something like this. I'd love to make a motion on getting a needs assessment in TQI, but anyway.
Rachel, and then John, then let's think about whether we can move on to the next topic.
I feel like this whole section went super astray, because if I'm accurate, we're still talking about the working group with Ben and John and Melanie and what their goals are, right? Is that where we still are?
I think we're at the middle school.
Okay, so I missed that transition.
Well, they're related though.
Well, was there a specific subtopic on that? I'll refer to that because I missed that transition.
Okay, Rachel, do you want to say anything else about that, or shall I go to John?
No, I just think that we need to do this, like, we need a clear vision on how we're getting information from people. And then we can, I don't feel like any of the 12 of us should have an opinion on the middle school at all right now. And the whole point should be, we need to have a method of how we're gathering information from all of our stakeholders in which to bring the next, step there.
Okay, John's next. And again, I would encourage us to try to wind up the discussion on this because we do have some other things that we really have to do this afternoon.
I think just for people on the board, a little, it's like Dick, Deb, Herb, and Mel, who are and Jim, who are on the 706, the study committee. Some of us might have some preconceived ideas about middle school, because we talked about that a lot, and we did a lot of that fact finding, and those, maybe it's not the same type of format of a needs assessment, but that was, we did an exhaustive research on that study committee and about equity and cost, controlling costs. It makes me think I want to return and reread that 706 report, because that could be a good reminder of, oh yeah, that's, it could help to provide some insights. So I just want to bring that up again. That might be worth revisiting for some of us. And also I'm just kind of curious, as far as development goes. I say development, it's coming from like the independent school definition of the word, someone who works in development or advancement, fundraising. While that can be, there's some inherent inequities that brings, that can also be a way for community to enhance community outreach to some people. To what extent have you guys as a board explored, I know there was one person who was doing development, any context that can be provided on that, development, PR, advancement, anything like that?
Anybody want to take that one? I have to admit, off the top of my head, I can't think of any specifics.
The only example was when we got substantial parts of 1 year's worth of the major fundraiser up at Burr and Burton, where we considered independent fundraising because Burr and Burton offered us an incredible amount of money to help spur reading availability for some of our younger students in the forms of providing opportunities and books and lots of different curricular kinds of changes. But we backed away from any kind of formal fundraising effort from within us because it is inconsistent with funding through the tax base. And we sort of dropped out of the business of considering that, accepted wonderfully an incredible amount of money with all of the intended opportunities that were associated with that because of that amazing annual dinner that Burr and Burton runs.
I think John raised a really good point about the merger study report, and maybe before we pick up this topic at another meeting, the folks who weren't involved in that, or folks like me who are not too sure what it says anymore, should go back and read it a couple of days before we meet, because I think that might help the discussion some. Would it be okay if we moved on to the board self-assessment, which does have to happen every year?
Did Randy want to speak first about the final thought?
Well, I just wanted to follow up and answer John's question, but I'm not entirely sure, John, that I understood your question. But we partner with the Stratton Foundation. They support us in a number of different ways, and the O'Neill Foundation is supporting our middle school success program. So I don't know. We haven't internally been fundraising, but we are certainly connected to organizations.
Wasn't there a person who kind of was putting in 20 hours a week or something doing
Bob
development?
Niles. So Bob is more communication. That was
Okay, that Deb mentioned his name before, and is he still?
Yep.
On?
He is. So he's still working for us. And he's been supporting me this summer. We'll continue to, as we're starting the year, do PR for our schools and continue with writing blogs, coming to meetings, making sure we're communicating out successes and stories about our school and, different on a variety of topics.
So would it make sense for the working group to talk to Bob at some point?
Yeah, so that's what
Okay.
somebody recommended, that Bob was a part of the
Okay.
group before, so we would include him again this time.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know who Bob was, but now I do.
No, that's okay.
I'm sorry for slowing us down, Herb.
No, no problem. So moving on, I think you all got the board self-assessment with the pie charts. And I guess what I would like to do is only discuss those where roughly 30% disagreed with something that we were supposed to be achieving. I don't mean you thought we shouldn't be achieving. I mean, you said that we weren't achieving it, just in the interest of time. And if we do it that way, the very first one would be the first item, which is that the board regularly discusses where the district should be headed 3 to 5 years into the future. Now, if you feel that during today's discussion, we have accomplished what we're supposed to, then I would urge you not to raise your hand and we can go on to the next one. But if there is something where a substantial number of board members said we're not doing what we're supposed to be and we haven't remedied it up until now, I think this would be a good time to bring it up and see what we can do about it. So again, the first one was the board regularly discusses where the district should be headed 3 to 5 years into the future. Anybody have any thoughts about what we should be doing about that we haven't already done today or recently? I will go on to the next one then.
Herb, I know you're proceeding along, but I thought that in our little effort to try and move to areas of total concern, you said there were a number of places where there was a small group that obviously voted that we were not doing something satisfactorily, and asked the question, is there something of the 20 or 30 or whatever it is, numbers of things that people really feel that the board should turn its attention to improving?
Well, I thought about that some more, but there are not that many where even as many, I can do the math here, even as many as 3 members disagreed. So I think if we just go through those, we'll accomplish things faster.
Okay. Go ahead.
And I don't see any comments about the one about the board regularly discusses. Obviously, if you think of something, you read the survey later on, reread it, and you have some idea, by all means, email either me or even the rest of the board, as long as you're not inviting an email meeting, and we can bring it up again. The next one that had as many as 3 members disagreeing in some form or another was that the board engages the community when establishing the future vision of the district. And I think this discussion tells us why there were at least 3 of us that didn't think we were doing that very well. But if anybody has any additional ideas, now's the time. I don't see any. Then there was a number of people who disagreed, I beg your pardon, with the idea that there is a process for soliciting and responding to input from staff and community. Regarding community, I think we probably already beat that horse to death. What about the staff aspect, though? Was there somebody that was still concerned that we weren't responding to input from staff? Deb?
Well, under policy governance, that's not our job. I mean, we should not be interviewing staff or intervening in staff matters at all. I mean, maybe this survey is for a different group, but under policy governance, we're not supposed to do that.
Yep. Any other comments on that?
Herb, I got follow up on that. I didn't do, first of all, I didn't do the survey because I felt like I didn't have, being new to the board, I didn't feel comfortable answering these. But I guess that, yeah, I just want to be clear about Deb's point there. I think it's a good one. Should we be, is there, is Randy distilling all the input from the staff? Is she their proxy? Or should staff feel more comfortable to come speak in public comment, or and if not, then that should this be changed, right? And I guess I want to be clear about the norm. Is for our purposes is Randy always the proxy, the representative, or the mouthpiece for the staff?
Well, let me take a stab at that, and then I'll call on Deb. In my way of thinking, the policy governance policies that we've adopted are a little unclear on this. If you look at number 3.3, I think it's point 2, it says the board will acquire monitoring information by one of 3 methods: by internal report, in which the superintendent discloses measurable interpretations, including a rationale and compliance information to the board; B, by external report, in which an external disinterested third party selected by the board assesses compliance with board policies; or C, by direct board inspection, in which a designated member or members of the board assess compliance with the appropriate policy criteria. So the one thing I can get out of this is that Randy, or whoever the superintendent is not necessarily the only source. Yeah.
That doesn't imply that staff members who have a complaint can come directly to the board for a remedy, which did happen on the Floodbrook board years ago and was totally disruptive and made, it happened all the time. And thank goodness we don't do that. But once you start down that path, it's not a good one.
Yeah, I think the only way that this question it could be consistent with policy governance is when they're talking about input, it wouldn't be input about an individual's working circumstances or something like that. It might be why is the 3rd grade at such and such a school a bigger discipline problem than it ever was before, or something. Okay.
I think Mel's got.
Oh, sorry, Mel.
Oh,
And Lindsay.
yeah.
Go ahead, Mel.
Mark.
Lindsay, I think, was up there first.
Sorry, I wasn't keeping an eye on the grid here. I was reading. Lindsay then first. You'll have to unmute.
Okay, sorry. So my interpretation of reading that question is there's a process for soliciting and responding to input from staff and community. And I took that as, I remember there's been a couple times when we've had in-person board meetings, we've had community members bring up topics. Like I remember one woman was bringing up about the gun violence or the lockdown because of a threat. And we listened, and then there was never ever a discussion about it again. And I just feel like we invite community members to come to our board meetings. They bring up topics, but we're really not able to converse with them. And then some topics are never brought up again. So my thing is that, yes, they have a place that they can come and speak what they want to speak, but we really didn't, at least in that instance, we really didn't even let her finish talking, let alone even afterwards have it on an agenda or anything like that.
Well, your point has to do with the words "and responding," because we typically don't respond at a meeting, right?
Yeah, well, we typically don't respond, but we didn't even talk about it at another meeting or anything like that to kind of bring her some ease that we were taking her concern into heart about the possible threat that happened at MEMS last year.
I've forgotten who's next. I see Mark's hand next to yours on my screen, so I'll call on Mark.
So to Lindsay's point, yes, closure. We're not very good at bringing closure to some of those points that are brought up. But going back to when we were exploring the whole policy governance, there is a protocol, and the board is not supposed to hear about certain issues. And I'll just use the maybe 3rd grade behavioral issue. The board doesn't hear that and bring that up. It's you send that back down to the teacher, to the principal, to the superintendent, just like for staff issues, you send that to the principal. The board is not supposed to entertain those in policy governance.
Yeah. Well, what about Lindsay's point about the responding?
That's the closure. We
That's the closure.
we don't perform closure at all.
Yeah. And I forget who was next, possibly Jane and then John.
So, this thing with the closure, I just want to reflect on the last meeting when the mother that came in to talk about, if she could possibly be approved to work for her child to go to a different school. And my point about welcoming her back at some point wasn't about trying to violate any kind of 504 rules or laws or anything like that. I understand about that. But what I was, I guess, trying to invite was, I think a lot of times it can be helpful for people in the community and for the board to hear that sense of closure, just that, wow, just interested to hear if things worked out for you. Not that we even have to get into all the specifics. And so I know that I was just kind of curious how often we hear those kind of closures. And so I know, like Randy, you had commented before when I was asking about her coming back, and I know I didn't communicate that clearly, but that's where I was coming from. Not that I was trying to violate any kind of laws of confidentiality and so forth, but I do think it's nice that the board can hear some closure stories.
Anybody else want to speak to, I think we're on the item about soliciting and responding to input. John, and then Melanie.
Mel, if you have a point about closure, go ahead, because mine's kind of related. But okay, yeah, I just want I think that, but thinking about the community outreach process and a previous discussion, and let's say down the road we talk thinking about regional middle school, whatever it may be, that we want to we identify our stakeholders, and one of our stakeholders, I would imagine, would be some of our teachers. Now, whether it's a working group or the board who's doing that community outreach, how do we reach out to staff and solicit their expertise, or is that done through Randy as a proxy? I guess I'm just wondering, are there times when we will directly connect with staff, or is the norm that will be done through Randy? It looks like Randy has a.
So we've talked about this in the past. So for those, if I'm inaccurate about what I say, but you as a board represent your stakeholders, which are the individuals who reside within your community. So that may or may not be teachers who work in our schools. Mm-hmm. So that's where we landed as your role around community involvement and soliciting input. But we talked about the fact that there are other stakeholder groups that have a place in the conversation. So it may be that I'm then reaching out to our leaders within our educational system as a different stakeholder group, and our teachers as a different stakeholder group, because based on whatever the topic is that we're talking about, we really need and want all the different perspectives as we're looking to kind of get a holistic perspective of what's happening.
Thank you, that's helpful.
This also relates to monitoring the superintendent's performance, which is a policy I think we should review sometime in the next year probably, but I don't think we have time to do it now. Melanie, do you want to add something before I go to Rachel?
Actually, I was going to say exactly that when we were talking, Deb was talking about staff. I can't remember, and my question was going to be, do we solicit information from principals when we do the superintendent's review? I can't recall the process, but it seemed like there was some room for that there.
Okay, Rachel?
I just want to point out, and this is not to speak to Randy's character, but just generally speaking, I don't know that she can advocate for what teachers would want, or, I want there to be a process from which we can hear from teachers as a stakeholder without it being relayed through other sources, because not that I don't trust Randy to relay it accurately, but they're different groups and they have different needs. And I've been doing a lot of listening around COVID, and just splitting like VPR split up their coverage. They had teachers talk one day, they had the Secretary of Education talk the other day, the superintendents had a different representative. And these groups, they have different representatives and they have different points of view and they have, you know, different opinions. So I don't care how it's done. This goes back to that communication working group, but for there being a way for us to gather information from all of the stakeholders and allow it to come directly from these people who have their own, you know, visions, and, you know, even with equity coming from the students themselves. And, you know, as opposed to saying, you know, I can equate this to saying like Randy is the president of our school district, and there is a president of our country who I do not believe would accurately relay what I have to say. Not that I'm equating Randy to our president, but just to say that there are different groups and I want to hear from them directly, because they may not have, you know, feel comfortable with their concerns going through other people.
So that we can at least get through the board evaluation before the witching hour of 3, I'm going to move on to the next question. And I hope somebody can understand it better than I did. It says, the board regularly evaluates progress toward meeting established school goals specific to systems operations. And there were 3 people that disagreed with that. And I'm just wondering, first of all, what did the question mean? And if you thought that we weren't meeting established goals, why? We'll go on to the next one then. And there aren't many left. One where 4 people disagreed out of 11 was that the board engaged the community in setting budget priorities. And I assume this means that having a couple of publicly announced budget meetings does not cut it among those 4 people anyway. Just quickly, any suggestions for improving on that, Melanie?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was one of the disagreeers on that one. And my thinking on that was that while we discuss the budget, we rarely, I feel like, or at least in my experience, I know I haven't been there, but even as a community member, not being on the board, I don't remember being invited to say, do we want to put money towards after school programs? Do we want to put money towards the arts? You know, allowing the community to kind of set those guidelines and for us to follow. And it was more, you know, line item stuff. There are some things there's no choice over, you know, special ed has to be funded, but are we saying that we're a community that really supports the arts, or are we not? And that was specifically what I was thinking about.
Anybody else on that one? So maybe the idea is that, yeah, we present a budget, but unless a member of the public says, well, I would like you to change this, it's different from us saying to them, what are your priorities? Ben.
Yeah, and I think I was one of the other people as well, and just feeling like there are opportunities that we build in. I mean, the public is allowed to attend our meetings, obviously any of our regular meetings, but there's not a whole lot of discussion about the details of what's going into the budget, the priorities and whatnot, that in a way that the public can weigh in until it's sort of being presented out as this is what the budget is, and it's being voted on. And so I think it's, you know, to really engage more than just the people that are, you know, again, it's like, how do we better engage more stakeholders, and how do we, you know, really get input on what people's priorities are. I think we can just do a much better job with this, especially on this financial piece, because we tend to get the squeaky wheels that have a particular gripe or axe to grind.
I think it's you know, important to again look at the role of policy governance in the budget, and look at typically what's the board's role in it. I do somewhat anticipate approaching this very differently this year, but maybe primarily because we're going to be having to make difficult decisions. And you as a board are going, you know, again, this goes back to, if you really understand what your community needs and values, then you're able to make decisions as a board that support the values and needs of your community. In the absence of that, you've got a superintendent who's making recommendations based on my interpretation of what you as a board value and prioritize and need, but we haven't gone through that community engagement process for you to be supported as individuals who are representing your community. So as we look ahead to this year, there are going to be difficult decisions. It is very likely that I'm going to be approaching the entire budget development process very differently, and making recommendations, maybe making a number of recommendations. I just think it's going to be a more transparent, but also a much more contentious process than we've had to face before. And I'm going to try to approach it from a policy governance perspective and work with your, executive committee and how we lean into it. But it's going to be interesting. So it'll be interesting to see as we look ahead a year from now where you are in this question once you've gone through it.
Jane?
This may seem premature, but I think we keep circling back to the concerns about processes and needs. And I'm just wondering if we might be able just to even set in motion a motion that's based on theoretical. Like theoretically, could we adopt, could we be in agreement to explore how to go about forming a needs assessment, or theoretically, vote on exploration of processes that will help us to determine what steps to look at, to develop a needs process, to gather information. It just seems like to me that it just seems to me that if we don't have something like that accepted, at least theoretically, to begin helping us to move, I think it's going to be a long time in coming, because those are big tasks for any just one subcommittee to take on. But I think at least if we theoretically adopt an idea, it might help move us.
Let's keep that in mind till we get to the work plan item on the agenda. There were just a couple of other items left that had a substantial number of folks disagreeing. One that surprised me was the board carefully monitors expenditure reports and assures the administration is addressing issues with revenue and expenditures. And 3 out of 11 said that they disagreed with that. And I'm just curious what's going on. Melanie.
I feel like I don't see expenditure reports, but equally, I also feel like it's not within our purview under policy governance. So I think I just answered the question based on how it was written.
Probably when we do this again next year, there should be an option. I can't turn off the phone here, sorry. There should be an option to say, I don't think this question applies to policy governance, but here's my answer.
No.
We do review the budget every quarter, Melanie. Have you been here for a quarter?
No.
So the whole thing comes forward often enough.
Okay.
You get to see the whole thing and the percent increases and anticipated and all of that, all the way.
That must be new in the last couple of years then?
No, is it? We regularly get the whole budget, pages and pages of it.
Huh.
Jane?
Like John, I felt like when I was doing the assessment, I basically scored, I thought, favorably, but again, it was kind of premature because of not really having been involved on the board. But I actually felt good about, from the way I read that question, because I guess when I looked at the minutes from, what was it, June, I had seen the report about the audit, and I thought, it looked like we did well on that. And so I guess I thought that influenced my ability to, respond to that.
Thank you. Mark?
I think what you were about to say earlier, Herb, was there was not an NA in the survey. So you either have agrees or disagrees, not something in the middle where it's not applicable.
Yeah, and I just made a note on my copy to maybe see if there's a way to change that for next year. The one that actually drew the biggest disagreement was the proposition that the board engages the community meaningfully in understanding changes in the education system needed for the 21st century. Now, I think our discussion earlier today touched pretty heavily on that, but is there anything else anybody wants to bring up regarding that question? All right. And kind of related, the board keeps the community informed of district performance. 4 folks out of 11 thought that was not true. Have we discussed that one sufficiently?
Part of it has to do with
Go ahead.
part of it has to do with the fact that a large part of the data was not delivered by the state. So the reports were regularly deferred and deferred and deferred. And finally, we did have one board meeting in which I think his name is Skylar got up and talked about performance. But that wasn't our fault. That was the fault of the state.
Melanie, then Deb.
Deb was first.
I just wonder if we might be able, in our annual report that we present to the citizens, if we might include some performance data, test results, anything about performance. We never mention that, and there's our place to do it.
Melanie?
Yeah, I also feel like this is, part of the PR and community engagement piece, and just that, board meetings I feel like are not enough, and it, maybe it's beyond our purview to do more. However, it just isn't enough, I think, to get the information out. And part of the community engagement that we might discuss is not just how to solicit information, but also how to make sure that it's frequently disseminated. Jackie's blog was a good idea, but again, so few people that I know had any idea she was doing it. So, it's my only feedback. How do we keep people informed when they're reluctant to seek out the information themselves?
Thank you. Well, that does it for my survey of issues where a substantial number said we weren't doing what at least the survey creator said we were supposed to. I'm sorry, Deb, I overlooked you.
I had a question about one of them that said the board has an ongoing system to review and update all policies every 3 to 5 years. I think last year Jackie started giving us her evaluation on several of her policies, and I found it really, really helpful. And I think we had decided that Val, who is our consultant on policy governance, was going to come back this spring and work with us on how, as a board, we take responsibility for reviewing the policies that are under our purview. And I just wondered if we would consider, maybe not right now since everybody's pretty busy, but at some point putting that back on the list so that we are current with the policies for which we are responsible. And I think what you said,
Nick, you want to say something?
Policy, and we discuss it as, as a board on the agenda.
Yeah, that leads us directly to exactly the next major topic that we said we had to get done.
Right.
And in that I believe that's determined policy monitoring.
Dick, before you get there, I think our discussion has already covered 6B, which is discuss impact on FY21. But if it hasn't, I want to make sure that we hit that point before we go to what Dick wants to talk about. Have we hit that one to everybody's satisfaction?
Mm-hmm.
Impact on FY21. Okay, go ahead, Dick. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
So we know that because of the COVID thing and the fact that there were several reports that were supposed to come, we had set up 4 detailed policies of the 8 that were going to be constructed. We actually did, I don't remember the numbers, I think it was 2.3 and 2.4, and we never got around to the final 2, one of which was actually a board level discussion of our responsibilities, including precisely the point of how we, A, one, monitor, and B, how we kind of keep going with our responsibilities. And so therefore, as we were discussing this while people were away at lunch, we said we've done 2, and we were going to do 2 more, and I've forgotten exactly what they actually were. And it seems that just because of so many things getting in the way, I think we have the capability of getting the 2 that we missed. And Herb, you were going to quote those 2, and then choose out of the remaining 4 the one that we would get to. And if we could get to 4 this particular year, given everything that's going on, that's where we go. And so therefore, Herb, you were going to say, we did X, we did Y, we didn't get to, we didn't, and one of them has to do, as I remember, with the protecting assets, which is, especially given the budget crisis that is coming on us, something we need desperately to get the superintendent's stuff. And then we need to do our job, which was part of it. And that was what Val was coming back to discuss in May or June. We never got there. So I think we've got to do that this particular year. But that's the nature of the discussion. And Herb, you were going to quote the titles of the other stuff.
Yeah. The ones that I believe we did go through are 2.3, which was financial condition and activities, and 2.4, which was financial planning and budgeting. The one that I am sure we intended to hit but didn't was 2.6, the asset protection one you just mentioned. And then I believe the remaining one was 3.3, which was delegation to the superintendent, which includes what sort of monitoring information we're going to acquire, but I'm not sure about that.
Herb, so I had the exact same recollection and the exact same uncertainty about the 4th one. So I also had 2.6 as one that was intended to be completed last year that wasn't, but I'm not sure about the 4th one. So I think that's part of what you would want to talk about as a board, is which policies do we want to put on the work plan for me to submit interpretations and to you for review and discussion, like we did 2.3 and 2.4, and we go from there.
You might want to repeat what the other 4 were.
If I could remember what they were, I would.
No, we had then mentioned 5 that we didn't talk about.
Well, there's quite a few we haven't talked about. For example, 2.1, treatment of students and parents, guardians. 2.2, treatment of staff. 2.5, emergency superintendent succession. We just have to hope Randy doesn't catch the pandemic virus. 2.7, community compensation benefit. There's a bunch of them. Yep.
Well, and those are all the executive limitations policies. There are also all the governance process policies that are solely our responsibility. Others are all assignments to Randy to give us the reports on these, but we are also responsible for governance.
Right. Yeah. After today's discussion, one of my thoughts is whether you might want to consider 4.1, which is about governing style. And it just, through the conversation today, it surfaced as something that I thought might be a beneficial, useful one to focus on for this year.
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest that we put on our work plan a combined discussion of 4.1, which is governing style, and 4.2, which is the board job description, that they are related. And in the review that I belatedly wrote yesterday, that seemed to be the policy that was most often difficult to follow, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering whether we could put that on the September plan for beginning the discussion, realizing that we'll probably have to continue it into October.
Mm-hmm.
For which one specifically? So I was sort of looking at the work plan, and this probably is some of my rookie questioning. But when I look at the work plan, I think to myself, okay, if we want to hit policies 2.6, 4.1, and 4.2, how do I map those? You know, where do we put them on the work plan? Because they take a long time. They take a long time for me to, when I think about what Jackie and Sue went through with 2.3 and 2.4, it was a lot of time developing that process to bring to you. And how do you want to approach the interpretation work that you do as a board during a meeting? And I think that there's some process also in how you're going to approach it, because it's the first time that you as a board are going to be looking at that.
Well, there's two different issues there. The 2.6, which is the asset protection, that involves your work interpreting what 2.6 means in the context of the T&G.
Right.
I think maybe sometime could be saved by doing what I think Jackie did on at least one occasion, which is sending something in writing before the meeting.
Right. So if we put that for like November, if I put that on the work plan that we'll present it in November, then I will have it in the board packet for discussion in November.
Yeah.
So I just don't know when you want to look as a board at 4.1 and 4.2.
Well,
if November sounds reasonable to you. I just want to do it, since it relates to financial stuff, I'd like to do it either before the budget season for Sue or after budget season. So that's why I recommended November.
About November for 2.6, which is the safeguarding. Melanie?
I just want to make sure that we're going through the right process of not using the policy committee to look through this first, but just addressing it full on as a whole board. Okay.
I think that's what we're doing, yeah.
Yeah.
So how is November for 2.6 as far as the board's concerned?
Yeah, it's
Okay. Deb?
totally up to whether Randy can pull it off and what works for her.
Well, we realize things might happen that will prevent it in the meantime, but let's make that our goal anyway. Now, when you get to 4.1, which is governing style, and 4.2, I don't think it's Randy's job to interpret those. That's our job. And let me suggest that the executive committee, Dick and David and I, should confer and see how long we think it's going to take us to identify parts of those policies that may have been interpreted differently over the last year or so, and see when we can have it ready for board discussion. I would hope we could have some of it ready by September and more ready by October, but we haven't sat down to do it yet.
The September and
Randy's time. Yeah, Dick.
and October meetings, and now November, may mean that we have to postpone this into the new year. Doesn't say avoid it. It's just, it may be very difficult to find time. Because remember that November, I believe, Randy, you preliminarily said that was when the principals were going to share their goals.
I was thinking October. That's when I told them they would present to you in October, because they've been working on them.
Well, I think all we can do is agree that at least Dick and David and I, and perhaps anybody else who would like to be kept informed and would want to join the discussion, we'll just try to move as fast as we can to get a review of 4.1 and 4.2 ready. Jane?
I guess I wondered, with the standpoint of just, that as a matter of transparency and that people understand that the board is being responsible, even if we can't get to something, I would think it would be helpful to just go ahead and somehow put it on a calendar in general. Even if possibly the other policies, that there's a prospective calendar that you aspire to, but at some point, at least then it's there, and then we know we can always address it and vote on it to be moved. But I think if we don't have things identified like that on a calendar, it makes it look like we're being remiss, I think.
So that I'm trying to complete the work plan that's in your packet, which is I think serving as the calendar. That's why we're talking about that right now. So I'm trying to fill it in, and then you'll get an update every month based on sort of what we're talking about. So hopefully, Jane, I think that'll meet what you're talking about.
Right. Thank you. I forgot. I did look at that, but thanks.
Well, and I think that's a very good point, because sometimes we haven't used the work plan to just remind ourselves that there are things we're going to have to deal with, and we've only listed the things we think we're actually going to get to, and maybe we need to do both with it. I think the other thing is that, strictly speaking, under policy governance, it looks to me like the work plan is supposed to correspond to the cycle, which is the fiscal year, so that next time we probably should be looking at a work plan that ends in June rather than March.
That's fine. I think typically, and I can adjust it if that's what you'd prefer. We've done it because the board rotates in March, but I'm happy to extend it out to June if that's what you'd prefer me to do.
Either we should do that, or we should change the policy, one or the other. Mark.
Maybe just a simple parking lot on the work calendar,
Yeah.
also for items that, you know, you want to keep on the forefront, but you are not slating for a particular month.
Yeah. I have another Zoom meeting that I would like to be able to get into at 3 o'clock, but I don't absolutely have to. And I think this was advertised to go perhaps as late as 3:30.
I actually have a 3 o'clock as well. I thought it was going till 3.
Yeah. So I would like to end at this point, but if anybody has a burning issue that you think we need to take up before the meeting on September 1st, let us know, and we can try to schedule a special meeting to take care of it.
We said when we were running out of time that people should take a look at the board norms, which haven't really changed a whole lot in the past couple of years, and see in writing to be considered in the September meeting whether there should be wordsmithing or something else. And also take a look at the board goals, and again, make as a part of that agenda consideration of wordsmithing of the current goals that we've got. We don't have time to go through the process at this particular point. So without objection, I'd like to postpone those two issues, which are important, that do shape a lot of what we do, ask the board to look at those and make suggestions and get them to Randy and or Herb, and better Herb, so that it can get into this board packet for September, and also we can have a good discussion.
And unless I see any expressions of horror or gnashing of teeth, I'm going to assume everybody's okay with that. All right. Now, we still are officially in a meeting, so there is one motion I need.
Well,
Hold on, Rachel had a comment.
I do have thoughts, or I wanted to have discussed today thoughts on meeting in person in September, since we're sending kids back to school in person in September. And I think there's some sort of, something to be said for us being willing to meet in person before we expect staff, students, and faculty and administrators to be teaching in person.
I think the short answer to that is, under the governor's directives, what we're doing here is something that can reasonably be done remotely. And the educational folks have decided that there are other things that cannot reasonably be done remotely. But if you want to schedule a special meeting to discuss that, I'll certainly work with Dick and Dave and Randy to set one up.
I could just kind of toss in, the VSBA sent out an email message on that recently, because that's been a big question, kind of saying what they understand to be the best practices. Actually, they still suggest we continue to meet this way. Yeah.
Oh, I saw it. I'm bringing this up despite that, because
Okay, that's cool.
something to be said.
Let me do it this way. If somebody wants to have another meeting between now and September, could you please raise your hand?
Well, I don't want to have a meeting to discuss it, but I do want to have put it out there.
Is our next meeting September 1st?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. We still need a motion.
Again, as with the norms and the goals, if someone has particular ideas about this particular thing, if they just put it in writing, because we're going to get the agenda preparation, and certainly if board members feel that we should set an example, then that should be a part of the agenda that
Right.
gets done.
You made the point. Randy and I are already running into a Zoom meeting conflict here. Is there anybody else that has to be heard?
Oh, I'm going to say, I think if we meet September 1st this way and discuss, since schools aren't open till the 8th, we're still,
Good point.
and then we discuss it at that first meeting and make a point to really address it.
Okay. I still need a motion.
So moved. Adjourn.
Moved by Dick to adjourn. Is there a second? Seconded by Melanie. All in favor, please raise your hand. It's Lindsay, is your hand up? Yes, it is. Okay. And okay, that's unanimous, and we are adjourned at 3:04 p.m. Thank you very much.
Thanks, folks.